Welcome to Fanfiction Audiobooks. Marvel World Destroyer. Chapter 61 List. You should keep this list. No one on it can be spared. Do you understand? Yihu handed a list to Zhang Yuan and then strode to the door and quickly disappeared into the night. Zhang Yuan's eyes became extremely cold when she looked at the three words Huawukui in the last column of the list. Her murderous intention towards Yihu became even stronger. Point. Just when she was planning how to enter the palace, a carrier pigeon slowly landed at the window. Zhang Yuan originally didn't want to pay attention to the letter of help sent by her father, but she immediately changed her mind when she saw the words Hero Yan Nantian. She was in urgent need of internal strength. Zhang Yuan rushed to Jiang's house overnight to prepare to receive Yan Nantian's internal power. When she entered the town, she suddenly thought of Mr. Hong Yi. She didn't dare to go to him when she had no strength in the past, but now she has more than 300 years of internal power and claims to be a first-class master. After showing her own strength, Zhang Yuan successfully conquered Hong Yi and revealed to her that she wanted to enter the palace and become a noble concubine. Hong Yi was overjoyed when she heard this. He also needed a big backer. Hong Yi mobilized his uncle's previous connections to provide Zhang Yuan with an opportunity to enter the palace. The way to the palace. After learning about the grievances between Yan Nantian and Yuhua Palace, Zhang Yuan decided to sacrifice her father to use her inner strength to take down the two palace masters of Yuhua Palace and Yan Nantian in one fell swoop. Yihu, who was wandering around in the capital, got the news that Lu Zhengfeng had washed his hands in the golden basin. He immediately recalled the plot of swordsman and decided to go to Hongyang City to kill the important characters and then go to Tiangziawai to deal with Xianba. Finally, he could leave this somewhat complicated situation by watching The Legend of Zhang Yuan. What a boring world! Yihu worked hard and finally arrived at Hongyang City the day before Jinpeng washed his hands. After walking around the city, he found a restaurant run by Wan Sanqian. As soon as he got to the second floor, he saw two people sitting on chairs competing with swordsmanship. Combined with Hongyang City, Yihu quickly guessed the identities of the two people. He chose a corner seat and sat down and started to have sex for free. The little girl at the table next to him looked at the big fish and meat in front of Yihu and suddenly felt that the vegetables in front of him were no longer fragrant. Want some? Hearing Yihu's voice, the little girl's eyes lit up and she began to scan the food on the table. Finally, her eyes stopped on the roast chicken. Yihu chuckled and tore off a chicken leg and then ate it in one bite with the little girl's delighted eyes. Watching the other person go from happy to shocked and finally crying, I felt secretly happy. The old man next to the girl frowned slightly when he saw this, but he didn't say anything and instead patted the girl's little hand to calm her down. Ling Huchang successfully rescued Yilan after a battle with Tian Bagwang in the distance, and Tian Bagwang jumped out of the window. At that moment, Yihu took out his M1911 and fired 5 shots. The moment he heard the gunshot, Tian Bagwang's heart beat wildly. His potential exploded and he twisted his body in the air to avoid his vitals. However, 2 bullets still hit his thighs. Tian Bagwang, who lost his center of gravity, fell to the ground and cursed loudly, "Where is it? The rats that came here dared to sneak attack on your grandpa. If you have the ability, come out and fight with real swords and guns." Yihu slowly came to the window and ignored Ling Huchang's astonished gaze. He took out his AK-47 and fired downwards. The injury to his right leg greatly reduced Tian Bagwang's speed. He avoided the first shot by instinct and was hit by subsequent bullets. Ling Huchang was stunned. He opened his mouth to say something, but closed his mouth when he saw the killing intent on Yihu's face. Yihu snorted and returned to his seat to continue eating and drinking. He waited until noon before slowly getting up and rushing towards the Lu mansion. 5 minutes later, Yihu looked down at the people on the roof beside the Lu mansion with a trace of disdain on his lips as he looked down at the people arguing below. He took out his Barrett sniper rifle and aimed it at Yu Buchan. Yu Buchan, who was righteously accusing the Songshan sect of being domineering, subconsciously rolled around, and the stone slab he was standing on instantly exploded. Scarlet blood was scattered in the courtyard. Yu Buchan covered his mangled shoulders and turned his attention to the roof. Yihu raised the corner of his mouth slightly and pulled the trigger again. A wisp of snowflakes bloomed in the scope. Yu Buchan's body fell heavily to the ground aside. Ling Huchang pulled out his long sword and jumped to the top of the building. Yihu didn't wait for him to ask questions and raised his hand to shoot him. Ling Huchang, who was seriously injured, used his internal strength to throw the long sword towards Yihu. Wanting to bury the other party with him at the last moment, the long sword made of fine iron stopped 1 meter in front of Yihu, and a bullet was shot from Ling Huchang's chest and took away half of his body. Yihu looked at the indignant people below and took out an RPG and fired a rocket in the direction where the Huashan faction was standing. He didn't believe that a group of rotten fish and shrimps could catch his own rocket with their hands like Liu Xiaofeng did. After dealing with everyone in the Huashan faction, Yihu went to Songshan to deal with Zhou Lengchan. Finally, he came to Haimia with excitement and wanted to see the legendary Dongfang Bubai. Yihu controlled Yang Lianting to open the door of the secret room. A sharp voice came from the screen. Sounded after. Brother Lian, didn't I tell you not to see anyone else? Before the voice could finish speaking, a figure appeared in front of the two of them. Yihu looked at the big man in red clothes and heavy makeup and almost couldn't help spitting out his lunch. Looking at the expression on Yihu's face, Dongfang Buibai's eyes flashed. With the intention of killing him, he said in a cold voice, a dog-like thing is worthy of looking after a slave. Following the sound, 2 embroidery needles shot straight into Yihu's eyes. Just as Dongfang Buibai was about to caress Yang Lianting, the 2 heat rays instantly turned the embroidery needles into nothingness and shot through Dongfang Buibai's body with an unstoppable attitude. Yihu took out his AK-47, walked to the opponent's side, emptied a magazine, raised the butt of the gun, smashed it at the unrecognizable corpse, and shouted harshly. How dare the damn thing stain my eyes? Looking at the 20% progress bar on the panel, Yihu calmed down a little, and quickly left Haimia and walked towards Tianxiawai. On the other side, Zhang Yuan chased Yan Nantian and others all the way under the slogan of revenge for her father, and finally moved Hua Gongqi and drained Yan Nantian and Xiao Yuer's skills and beat them to death in front of Hua Wuqi. Looking at Hua Wuqi's sad expression, Zhang Yuan had a sickly smile on her face. She wanted to slowly torture the other person's spirit and then turn him into her doll when the other person collapsed. Yao Yu, who had just walked out of Yuhua Palace, looking at Zhang Yuan's arrogant look, she frowned slightly and snorted. Where do these rats dare to act so recklessly in front of my Yuhua Palace? After saying that, she struck out with a palm in the air and prepared to take down the madman. Zhang Yuan snorted and a 400-year attack burst out of her body to defeat the opponent's attack. Just when Yu was about to call her sister to beat the opponent together, she felt that her internal strength was like Zhang Liaohui, flowing towards each other like entering the sea. Lian Xing, leave quickly. Yao Yu only had time to shout out a word before she was sucked into him. Lian Xing subconsciously took 2 steps forward to help her sister, but after seeing Yao Yu's miserable condition, she quickly reached out to hold Hua Wuqi and wanted to take her to escape together. This was the moment. Due to the delay, the 2 of them were sucked into the air by Zhang Yuan. Watching the 2 masters die in front of him, Hua Wuqi roared in grief and anger. You devil! You don't deserve to die! Chapter 62 Pathological Love. Zhang Yuan ignored Hua Wuqi's curse and slowly came to the other party, squatting down and stroking the thoughtful face, saying softly, Wuqi, you are mine. I will never allow anyone to hurt you. Half an hour later, Zhang Yuan left the burning Yuhua Palace with Hua Wuqi who had lost her inner strength. After some harvesting, Zhang Yuan already had 600 years of skill in her body, but this was not enough for her to compete against Yihu. She decided to speed up her pace to let Hua Wuqi die in the opponent's hands. Hong Yi used her contacts to get a chance to face the saint. Zhang Yuan successfully won the title of concubine Yan by virtue of her beauty and charm, and unified the entire harem with her own strength to make the emperor ignore the government. Zhu Wuxi, who got the information, showed a bright smile on his face. In his heart, he began to calculate the possibility of successfully ascending to the throne under the slogan of the Qing Emperor. After some calculations, he decided to indulge Zhang Yuan to disrupt the court, and then contact the minister in private to lay the foundation for future ascendancy. At the same time, Zhang Yuan asked the emperor to summon the heads of the major forces to Beijing to discuss the matter of the leader of the martial arts alliance. I'm sorry, I need your internal strength for some reason. Zhang Yuan pinched Liu Xiaofeng who came to investigate the mysterious disappearance of the heads of various sects with one hand and said in a flat tone, Don't worry about your sword god friend, I will send him down to accompany you of. Yihu, who was rushing to the Tianxiawai, looked at the sudden skyrocketing progress bar, and the corners of his mouth rose slightly. This time, letting Zhang Yuan go was to use the other party to improve the progress of the task. Judging from the current situation, the effect is outstanding. 7 days later, Yihu came to the gate of Tianxiawai and used his spiritual power to form a position around him to make the enemy ignore his existence. Half an hour later, there was a noise from the front, and Yi Hu walked forward and looked at the eyebrows of the little boy who was wrestling together. If he remembered correctly, Xiong Ba would appear and take over Feng Jiun and Feng Yun in a short while. Stop fighting! The young Kong Ci stood aside and shouted loudly. The leading child Wang Dabio came to Kong Ci and just raised his hand when Bulet and Jing Yun in the distance made a hole in his head with a wood carving. Xiong Ba grabbed it and flew towards him. The wooden carving crushed it into pieces with a strong grip, and looked at the crowd with a stern look. Gang leader! A group of children hurriedly knelt down on one knee to salute Xianba. Only Tita Duanlang raised his head and announced his father Nanling Jian Xiao Duanjue's name. Just when Wen Chaochu was about to teach Duanlang a lesson, Yi Hu came out from behind the big tree. Leader of the Xiong Gang, I have long admired your name. I wonder if I am lucky enough to experience the legendary magical skill of returning 3 points to vitality and 7 points to sea luck. Ha 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 ha, trivial tricks are not worth mentioning. Xiong Ba smiled heartily. He did not feel the fluctuation of internal energy in Yi Hu. He subconsciously looked at the woods on the left, thinking that the opponent's support was hiding in it. Yi Hu looked at Xiong Ba's vigilant face and raised the corners of his mouth slightly, taking out his AK-47 and pointing at it. The opponent fired a burst of fire. 3 points back to the vitality. Xiong Ba shouted low and used his inner strength to condense a ball of water to cover himself. Yi Hu's eyes lit up when he saw this and took out the RPG with his backhand. Xiong Ba used the wind god's legs to get close to Yi Hu and wanted to use the hidden weapon to kill the guys who come to provoke you. The water ball condensed in Xiong Ba's palm stopped 50 centimeters in front of Yi Hu. Yi Hu took advantage of Xiong Ba's daze and pulled the trigger. With a loud bang, Xiong Ba flew upside down 5 meters away, covered his chest, vomited a mouthful of blood, and turned around to run away. Tiger took out the last rocket and loaded it, aimed at the fleeing figure and slowly pulled the trigger. After a loud sound, the progress bar reached 45%. Yi Hu turned his head and glanced at the child who was blocked by the energy shield. He took out the M1911 and shot several protagonists. He nodded with satisfaction at the 60% progress. Now he just waited for Zhang Huang to kill Zhu Yuyu and others. If you harvest the remaining blood, you can leave this world. Zhang Yuan, who has absorbed the inner strength of all the masters in the world, has a 1000-year-old master-level strongman in her body who can destroy Yi Hu with just one hand. She feels that she has the capital to fight against Yi Hu. To be on the safe side, she decides to kill Zhu Yuyu and suck him dry on the day he ascends the throne and proclaims himself emperor. Internal force. At the same time, Zhu Yuyu also issued an order to the 4 spies of heaven, earth, Xian Huang and Huang in Halong Villa, deciding to get rid of Zhang Yuan as a scourge on the day he ascended the throne. 3 days later, Zhang Yuan walked to the main hall wearing a dragon robe with a stern look, followed by a group of civil and military officials. Zhu Wulai stood at the top of the stairs and said with a cold voice. Zhang Yuan, you went against the grain and framed Zhong Liang. You poisoned and killed the emperor's brother. I will fight you to the death today. Zhu Wulai's clothes were not in the wind. Huge internal force surged out of his body and slammed into Zhang Yuan in front of him. The next second, the 2 internal forces collided in mid-air. The stone bricks around them exploded, and all the civil and military officials vomited blood and fell. Fly out! The magical power of indestructibility. Phantom sword. Dominate the world. Spreading money all over the sky. 4 figures shot out from the shadow of the building on the side. Zhang Yuan snorted and used her internal energy to interrupt the 4 people's attacks from the air. She also absorbed the 4 people's skills with a trick. Zhu Yuyu took advantage of the moment Zhang Yuan took action to mobilize all his internal energy to become unstoppable. His posture broke through Zhang Yuan's body protecting qi, and he slapped the opponent's temples with both palms, preparing to kill him with one move. I am the only one in heaven and under heaven. Zhang Yuan roared and exploded with all her internal strength to withstand Zhu Yuyu's fatal blow. Looking at the 4 secret agents who were gradually weakening, Zhu Yuyu frowned slightly and felt that something was beyond expectation. He was at the stage where his old strength had been used up and new strength had not been regenerated. On the other hand, Zhang Yuan was absorbing the skills of the 4 people at an incredible speed. The opponent's huge internal force tried to fly him away. If he retreated at this moment, he was 80% sure of escaping. But seeing the dragon robe on Zhang Yuan, Zhu Wei decided to take a gamble. Apart from his sincerity, he only cared about the throne in his life. He would never allow yourself to fall on the last step. After the 2 stalemate for 3 minutes, the 4 spies fell to the ground dying. Zhu Wuxi shrank his pupils and was bounced away by Zhang Yuan's internal force. Nielai Zhu ignored the bleak smile on his lips and tried to raise his head to look at the sky and murmured in a low voice. Suxin. Humph ha 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 ha. Zhang Yuan half closed her eyes, folded her hands on her belly and laughed for a while, then opened her arms and said in a cold voice, "From today onwards, I am the only king in this world." The few surviving officials trembled and knelt on the ground and shouted, "Long live my emperor! Long live! Long live my emperor!" With a wave of her right hand, Zhang Yuan slowly walked up the stairs and entered the hall to ascend to the throne. Yihu, who was rushing into the city, looked at the 85% progress bar and slapped the horse under his crotch. A week later, a dusty man led a horse into the capital and walked all the way towards the imperial palace. The guards he met on the road seemed to have seen nothing. With a palm strike, the strong wind blew away the tables and chairs around him. Chapter 63 Return. As expected of Emperor Zhang. I recognize your internal strength. Among those who have fought against me, I would like to call you the strongest. Yihu opened his arms and spoke in a very aggressive tone. Zhang Yuan's eyes were focused. Even now, she couldn't detect the fluctuations in the opponent's internal energy. Just when Zhang Yuan was about to run away, Yihu said unhurriedly, "If you dare to run away from me, just kill him." "How dare you?" Zhang Yuan shouted angrily and blew away her hair. Her long black hair was flying in the air. Her eyes were filled with murderous intent, as if she saw that her internal strength could not break through. Zhang Yuan raised her hand and sucked the sword on the wall into her hand, preparing to use it. The divine weapon's edge was supplemented by internal force to break Yihu's body protecting aura. Facing Zhang Yuan's full blow, Yihu increased the energy output in his body. The next second, a beautiful figure flew out and hit the wall hard. Zhang Yuan put her hands on the ground and shouted loudly, "You said you would give me 3 times. Take a chance." Yihu raised his eyebrows and recalled what he had promised to the other party before. Just when he was about to speak, he saw Hua Wuqi tied up on the bed beside him. His thoughts changed and he walked towards the bed. Zhang Yuan waved her hands and shouted with 4 waves of Genkai. "Road! Run without a hitch!" Yihu looked at Zhang Yuan, who was rushing over desperately, and slowly raised her right hand to mobilize the energy in her body to break through the opponent's protective aura and whispered, "I always mean what I say. Now that 3 times have passed, do you have anything else to say?" Yihu slowly walked to Zhang Yuan, looked down at the face that was very familiar in his memory, and said with emotion, "You have everything except love in this life. It can be considered a perfect ending. Wu Quebec. Run." Zhang Yuan did not look at Yihu's slowly raised feet. Instead, she looked at the figure on the bed and raised her hands, her eyes full of nostalgia. Hua Wuqi's empty pupils had a bright light and then dimmed. Zhang Yuyan's raised hand fell heavily to the ground. Yihu glanced at the progress bar that was only 5% off, took out his M1911 and fired at Hua Wuqi. Then he placed the 2 bodies on the bed, took out 3 grenades and pulled the ring. "Take it off and throw it into the Jiaofang Hall after walking out of the palace gate." After a loud noise, the surrounding space began to distort and dissipate. Yihu returned to his room, sat on the bed, opened them all, and frowned slightly as he looked at the 6,000 points inside. Logically speaking, he had experienced 4 worlds this time plus the 2 remaining points. 1,000 should be 10,000. After some fiddling, Yihu stopped worrying about the problem. He opened the door and walked down the stairs to the living room, took out a bottle of Coke from the refrigerator, and turned on the TV to watch the latest news. "My name is Tony Stark and I am not afraid of you, a coward. I will kill you with my own hands. Remember my address." Watching Stark's impassioned speech on the news, the corners of Yihu's mouth slightly raised. Mandarin in the movie is not outstanding, but in the comics, he is Stark's #1 enemy. Yihu is looking forward to the collision between the two. Potts, who had just finished talking to Killian, frowned slightly as he looked at the scene on the car TV. The information about the 10 Rings gang that Yihu had said came to mind. Tony made such an enemy, which made her a little worried about his safety. But when Potts returned when the manor saw the large doll next to the fountain, the complaint in his heart immediately disappeared. Walking briskly into the hall, he hugged the oncoming mecha. At night, when the two slept together, Tony dreamed of the scene of the previous battle and subconsciously summoned the mecha. Hearing Potts scream, Tony opened his eyes. The eyes stopped the mecha's weapon system. The sudden shock made Potts feel dissatisfied. Feeling that Tony loved the mecha more than him, he angrily left the bedroom and went to other rooms to rest. Upon seeing this, Stark shook his head and slowly lowered his raised hand. After the last battle, he became very anxious. Maya Hansen came to the manor early the next morning and wanted to say something to Stark. Potts came to the living room from the second floor and had a conversation. After Maya pointed at the picture on the surveillance video and said softly, "Hey! You should take a look at this." After comforting Potts, Stark looked at the screen and then looked back and saw a rocket flying quickly towards the manor, blowing up the basement with a loud bang. At the critical moment, Stark used brain waves to control the Mark 42 to attach to the wave. Protect the opponent from harm. Looking at the figure hitting the wall heavily, Potts felt a touch of emotion in his heart. The little conflict last night disappeared instantly. Looking at the ceiling that hit Stark, he subconsciously rushed in front of him, smashed the falling gravel and whispered, "I finally understand why you don't want to take off this thing." There was a smile on Stark's face, and he was about to say something emotional when he was interrupted by the sound of missiles, and he could only shout loudly, "Take her out quickly, I'll be there soon." As soon as the voice hit the ground, a gap suddenly opened to separate the two. Hearing Stark's roar, Potts reached out to support Maya and walked out. Stark, who was suppressed by the fire and could not look up, heard Jarvis say when the person arrived at the safe area, he used brainwaves to control the mecha to fly towards him. Potts, who had just arrived at the fountain, was led forward by the mecha and walked a few steps forward, watching the other party fly to the villa and heaved a sigh of relief. "It's my turn to perform." Putting on the mech, Stark had a cold look in his eyes and raised his hand, ready to use his Sidewinder missile to teach the armed helicopters outside. Jarvis immediately said, "Sir, the right arm is damaged and cannot be opened." Stark's face darkened and he dodged the bullets. He tapped the armor of his right hand with his left hand to take out the Sidewinder missile and threw it at the armed helicopter, then detonated it with the palm cannon. After a battle, Stark destroyed 2 armed helicopters and fell into the sea along with the villa. The dark and quiet seabed reminded Stark of his previous battle with the Kiritans, and his breathing became heavy. Jarvis saw he detached his arm mecha and took Stark's hand to drag him out of the underwater ruins. I took Stark flying towards Rose Mountain all the way. There were some clues there. After landing, Stark used the phone in the phone booth to leave a message in the internal information channel of the mecha. He was standing on the edge of the cliff holding the mecha mask sadly. Potts heard a beeping sound and took a closer look and found a red light flashing inside the mecha's visor. Driven by curiosity, Potts put on the mask and was relieved when he heard the familiar voice inside. Maya sat in the car and told Potts about the cooperation between Killian and Mandarin and asked the other party to find a safe place. Yehu's face flashed through Potts' mind while he was driving. The other party had told him about Mandarin's information before, and he was also the most powerful mutant. It was right to find the other party. The two of them came to a place based on their memories. Villa. Potts breathed a sigh of relief as he looked at the architectural style on the side. After getting off the car and knocking lightly at the door, Alyssa observed the two of them through the camera at the door. After discovering that it was Potts, she opened the door and projected herself in the living room and whispered, "Welcome, Miss Potts. I have already informed you, sir, please wait here for a while." Chapter 64. It turns out to be Xiaobizan. Yehu, who was sleeping soundly, slowly opened his eyes when he heard Alyssa's call. He rubbed his somewhat messy hair and got up and walked downstairs. When he reached the second floor, he glanced at Jessica's room and sighed helplessly. With a sigh of relief, the number of times the other party returned from missions around the world after being successfully brainwashed by the corned egg and forming a team with Natasha Hawkeye became less and less. "Potts, aren't you afraid that Stark will make me jealous if you come so late?" Hearing the sound coming from the stairs, Potts slowly put down the coffee cup in his hand and looked sideways to see Yehu, who was wearing cartoon pajamas, slowly walking out of the stairs. "Pfft! Sorry." Maya took out a tissue and wiped the water stains from the corner of her mouth. She looked at Yehu apologetically. Potts on the side tried hard to calm down the smile in her heart and whispered, "Yi, I'm here this time. I'm asking you for help." Looking at Potts' sincere eyes, Yehu put away the smile on his face, came to the sofa, sat down and said in a deep voice, "Do you need my help with anything, my friend?" A smile appeared on Potts' face. The other person had saved his life just like Carlson. At this moment, he couldn't help but feel warm in his heart when he heard this statement. "Mandarin attacked Stark Manor in the evening. The safest place I can think of is yours. If it causes you trouble, I am willing to. No need to explain, we are friends, right? Yihu reached out and patted Potts on the shoulder and said in a casual tone, just stay here with me. Don't say that one mandarin is 10, and I don't want to touch a hair on your head. Maya rolled her eyes listening to Yihu's domineering words. Thinking of the power unleashed by those transformed soldiers, she was very dissatisfied with the man in front of her, but Potts insisted on coming and there was nothing she could do. Thank you very much. Too many things happened today. All I can do is try not to cause trouble to Tony. There was a hint of trembling in Potts's voice. Yihu stood up and patted the other person's shoulder again. He walked to the corner and kicked the box containing Dabai. After a burst of inflating sound, Dabai's cute figure appeared in the living room. Which lady are you responsible for treating the psychological trauma of tonight and helping her get out of the shadows? Yihu pointed at Potts and gave orders to Dabai. When he heard that there was a patient, Dabai immediately became interested and walked towards Potts with his short legs. Yihu showed a smile on his face and said softly, this guy is mine. A personal doctor who will counsel you on your mental health. Thank you. Potts nodded slightly and tried to squeeze out a smile. Yihu came to the stairs and pointed to the second floor and said softly, you can choose a room you like and have a good sleep. Don't worry about that guy Stark after all. There's a lot of help. After hearing this, Potts' mind immediately recalled the previous scene of the battle with aliens. Thinking of the power of those people, Potts' heart slowly settled down. On the next morning, under Dabai's guidance, Potts regained his strength as a strong woman. The more he looked at the fat man's aura, the more he liked him. Looking at Yihu who was busy in the kitchen, he said with some embarrassment. Yi, do you, a psychiatrist, sell it? Yihu's eyes lit up and he said softly, Dabai is my dearest relative, friend, brother, and brother. Ah, it turns out it's so important to you, I'm sorry Yi, I shouldn't have been like this. Potts stood up and bowed slightly to Yihu with an apologetic look on his face. He squeezed out a smile and said slowly, I can share its code with you. I believe that Guy Stark can definitely make a Christmas gift for you. A flash of surprise flashed in Potts' eyes. She preferred a more practical robot like Bimax to the big rabbit that was destroyed in the explosion, and his soft belly was very flattering. Just as the three of them were enjoying breakfast, Alyssa's projection suddenly said, Sir, an energy is approaching. Maya's body trembled when she looked at the car parked outside the courtyard in the projection. She recognized it as Killian's car and couldn't help but lean towards Potts. Yihu slowly swallowed the food in his mouth and said softly, let them go. Come in. Just as Killian was about to violently break the door, he heard the sound of the lock opening. He gently opened the door and walked into the living room with calm steps. Before he could speak, Yihu asked, what does this gentleman want here? I'm looking for someone. If you know how to look, I can save you a little pain. Killian straightened his collar and stared at Potts sharply. A fiery red appeared on his left cheek. Yihu took out a tissue to wipe the corner of his mouth and spoke calmly. He said, are you good at hitting? Being able to hit is of no use. You need to have power and background to get around. Who are you? How dare you talk so shamelessly here? My name is Killian, you can also call me Mandarin. With a trace of ridicule on his lips, Yihu walked up to Killian, reached out and patted the other person's cheek and said disdainfully, it turns out to be Xiaobizan. Feeling the pressure coming from around him, Killian began to have flame patterns all over his body. After struggling for a while, his eyes when he looked at Yihu no longer had the arrogance and domineering look before. Who are you? Yihu ignored Killian's roar and turned to look at Potts and said softly, are you going to kill him? Potts shook his head subconsciously. The other person was an acquaintance of hers after all. She didn't want to see him die in front of her. Yihu reached out and grabbed Killian's arm, ignoring the high temperature above, and removed the other person's right hand and said in a cold tone, don't wander around in front of my eyes from now on, do you understand me? After speaking, he opened a door in front of him with a snap of his fingers and sent the other party to the cave where Stark was once captured. Potts looked at Killian who suddenly disappeared and said with some surprise, what kind of ability is this? Don't worry, he's fine. Yihu smiled at Potts and slowly returned to the dining table to continue eating breakfast. Killian, who was in the desert, used his ability to grow an arm, and looked at the surrounding desert environment in a daze, holding back the horror in his heart and standing there waiting for someone to pick him up. 5 hours later, an armed helicopter came to the valley based on Killian's location. A bald man jumped out of the helicopter and said in surprise, "Boss, why did you come to the desert? Have you done what you were told before?" Killian stared at the bald man calmly, waiting for his answer. "Don't worry, boss, the war machine has been tied to the base by us. And that guy Stark?" Killian nodded and walked towards the helicopter. The bald man stopped talking about the desert with a wink. After returning to the headquarters, Killian vented his anger on Stark. After some cynicism, he felt that the anger in his chest was completely disappeared. Killian asked Stark to turn around and came to the room where the war machine was parked. Under the high temperature, Rhodes chose to open the mecha to gain a chance of life, but facing the veteran soldier who had been strengthened by the extremis virus, Rhodes only insisted on 2 moves before being knocked to the ground. Killian stepped into the mecha and rushed to the airport to prepare to kidnap the Supreme Leader to pave the way for his partners. Chapter 65 Killian and Number 039, S Conspiracy. Stark was dropped into the air. The 2 guards stood opposite and looked at the rich man with joking faces. Normally, they would not even be able to get close to each other. The children's watch on the table next to him made a harsh sound. Kay's eyes lit up and he knew that his mecha had been repaired. What a irritating thing. A strong man guarding the watch casually threw the watch on the ground and crushed it with his foot. Stark's eyes narrowed and he said solemnly, "This is my friend's sister's watch. If you do this, I can only destroy it. You kill." Ha ha ha! The man laughed wildly and pointed at the bound Stark and sneered, "How are you going to kill me? Just like this?" Stark will flip his hands vigorously and aim his palms at the 2 people, so that after a while, the mecha can be used to kill the 2 people with the palm cannon. Looking at the room where there is no movement, Stark's face his smile gradually disappeared, and he flipped his palms in disbelief. 5 minutes later, a figure flew in from the window and put it on Stark's hand. In the man's shocked eyes, a palm cannon penetrated his body. Another strong man with a ponytail quickly raised his right hand to kill Stark. But the wrist was firmly held by the other party. After a great battle, Stark fought his way out of the siege into the courtyard. The rest of the mecha arrived belatedly and rearmed him into Iron Man. The sound of propellers came from the sky. Tony looked up and saw a helicopter coming from the sky. There is Rhodes' war machine flying by. Stark subconsciously aimed his palms at the ground in an attempt to catch up with the mecha, but the remaining energy of the mecha was insufficient. He had no choice but to leave the base on foot. He met Rhodes in the garden. After some discussion, Stark remembered asking Mandarin before. During the stand-in, the other party said that there was a ship. Under Gunpoint's persuasion, the double quickly gave Stark the key and watched the 2 leave. After lunch, Yehu took Potts to the SHIELD headquarters. He had always wanted to ask about Jane Foster's whereabouts. But since I don't have a good excuse, I just used Potts as an excuse to go to SHIELD. In the last battle, Yehu took away the cosmic cube, which prevented Thor and Loki from returning to Asgard. Nick Fury proposed to imprison Loki underground until the cosmic cube was found before letting them leave. Thor agreed to the other's request. Abandoning his younger brother and coming to Jane Foster's side, Thor didn't feel sad about having a beautiful woman by his side. After using the dark energy device, Odin's power began to decline. After hearing the situation reported by Heimdall, he secretly cursed his stupid son for not succeeding. You can't even find a Rubik's Cube. Without a Rubik's Cube, it will take Asgard a long time to repair the Rainbow Bridge. Yehu and Yehu arrived at the SHIELD headquarters. Potts saw a flash of surprise in Coulson's eyes standing at the door. She remembered that Tony said that the other party had died in the war. Yehu took 2 steps forward and whispered, "I want to know where Jane Foster is now? I'm sure Stark will be happy to know that you protected his girlfriend." After hearing Yehu's terms of exchange, Coulson reported a list of addresses with a smile on his face. Yehu turned to Potts with a smile and said apologetically, "Sorry, I have some things to do." "It's okay Yi, with Coulson here I believe he will protect me." Potts smiled empathetically and then strode towards Coulson. Yehu quickly left SHIELD headquarters and asked Alyssa to search for the location information provided by Coulson, and then kept recalling the information in her mind. The next second, a light blue space door appeared in front of Yehu. Thor, who was doing scientific experiments with Jane Foster, had his eyes fixed and held Mjolnir to protect his girlfriend behind him. Yehu, who had just stepped out of the space door, was fed a mouthful of dog food on the spot and stared at Jane Foster's tone. He said unkindly, "This is not your place, leave now." After saying that, he used his mental power to support himself and flew to the distant building. Thor frowned and pondered the power Yehu had used before. A flash of inspiration flashed in his mind and he said, "It turned out that you took the space gem away." Looking up and finding himself alone, Thor swung Mjolnir and rushed towards Jane Foster. Yehu broke through the wall and came to a corridor. Using the spatial sensing given by the space gem, he rushed towards the crack in front of him. When he came to a stone mill, he used his mental power to cover the liquid flowing inside and put it into his backpack. After losing the reality stone, the surrounding space began to collapse. With a thought, Yehu's whole body flashed with light blue light and he instantly returned to the villa. He once again praised his original choice in his heart. At the same time, Stark remotely controlled the mecha and came to the Sky Fortress. The remaining generals inside were rescued. The main body and Rhodes followed the signal of the war machine and came to a ship. Seeing Supreme Leader Rhodes being hung in the air, his face turned cold. He took out his pistol and quickly sneaked into the enemy base camp. Without Potts to hold him back, Stark acted without scruples, allowing Jarvis to control the Iron Legion and start bombing wildly. Rhodes looked at Stark, who put on the mecha and left with an envious look on his face. Then he moved his eyes to the war machine worn by the Supreme Leader and jogged to the bottom of the chain. Killian, who had taken the Extremis virus, was standing on the star. In front of K, he performed a wave of dismantling mechas with his bare hands. The materials used by the Iron Legion that came this time were inferior to those of the carefully crafted mechas. They were somewhat inferior to Killian, but every time the opponent was injured, he would be one step closer to death. The Extremis virus was healing the body at the same time. It will also cause the user to lose control and eventually explode to death. Stark used the valuable mecha to consume Killian and finally defeated him with money. In the early morning of the second day, the news reported the arrest of the deputy leader. Malekith woke up from his slumber after seeing the ether particles. He lost the other party's signal just as he was about to explore the specific location. What's going on? Why did the aura of the ether particles disappear? Has it been resealed? Malekith frowned slightly and looked at the deputy on the side. After some discussion, the two decided to go to the place where the signal last appeared to investigate the situation. Jane Foster used instruments to explore the previous factory for 3 days. After finding that everything was normal, she returned to the RV with some dissatisfaction. The two looked at each other and thought of Yehu at the same time. A month later, Jane Foster brought Thor to the villa and knocked on the door. After a soft knock, the door opened. Thor subconsciously blocked Jane Foster behind him. The two came to the living room and watched the sitting. Thor, the figure on the sofa, asked first. It was you who took away the cosmic Rubik's Cube before. Yehu raised his eyebrows and said with some dissatisfaction, "Watch your wording, son of Odin. I absorbed this thing based on my ability, how can I use the word rob?" Thor's eyes flashed slightly. The energy emanating from Yehu just now made him have the illusion of facing his father. The two had met several times before. He was sure that Yehu was not that strong at that time. Thor's eyes showed an incredible look. Said loudly, "You actually fused gemstones." Chapter 66 Dark Elves Attack. Can you use the power of the Space Stone to send us back to Asgard? A look of expectation flashed in Thor's eyes, and a look of hesitation appeared on Yehu's face. If someone else had said this, he would have refused, but Thor was his friend. It would not be difficult to send him back, but Yehu was afraid that Odin would take action against him. Judging from the Infinity Gauntlet in the opponent's treasure house, it seems that Odin once had the idea of collecting all the gems. Although I don't know why he gave up the idea later, there is no guarantee that Odin in his old age will not be tempted. Thor looked at the hesitation on Yehu's face and said sincerely, "Please Yi. The 9 kingdoms are in chaos and I need to get back to Asgard as soon as possible." The scene where Yehu used the space gate was discovered by Heimdall, who was always paying attention to Thor. Odin, who learned about the situation, immediately asked Heimdall to contact Thor to share the 5 senses with him and inform Thor of recent events. There was no universe before the whereabouts of the Rubik's Cube. Odin did not intervene in Thor's choice, but now Thor should shoulder the responsibility of the king. "Okay, there's really nothing you can do about it." Yehu spread his hands helplessly, and Thor's face showed a touch of joy and opened his hands to give Yehu a big hug. The 3 of them came to the S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters together and prepared to take Loki and leave together. They met in front of him in the lobby on the 1st floor. Stark comes to pick up Potts. "Hey, isn't this our Thor? Why don't you stay on Earth as a prince in Asgard?" You'd better shut up, Iron Man. Thor stared at Stark sharply and said coldly, otherwise I will make you understand what respect is. Just as Stark was about to retort, Potts stretched out his hand to hold him back. The latter looked at Thor apologetically and whispered, I'm sorry, Tony talks like this. I apologize to you on his behalf. No. It's okay. Thor scratched his head and said softly, I forgive him for his rudeness. When it comes to beating people, Thor is second best and no one dares to say he is first, but Potts's submissive attitude makes him a little uncomfortable. The enemies he faced in the past always bowed their heads and surrendered after being defeated by him. He didn't do this. Jane Foster, who was on the sidelines, saw that her boyfriend was frustrated and quickly stood up to compete with Potts. Looking at the smokeless war between the two, the three men showed a hint of helplessness on their faces. Yehu pulled Thor and walked upstairs. Before leaving, he greeted the two of them, but the two women, who were immersed in the battle, did not respond. Stark hesitated for a second and then caught up with the two of them. Nick Fury happily agreed to release Loki. Looking at Yehu's leisurely back, Stark whispered, what are you doing? I want to send them back to Asgard. Yehu shrugged and spoke very calmly. Stark's eyes lit up and he said softly, can you take me with you? Yehu did not answer but turned his attention to Thor. He would not make decisions for others randomly, not to mention that this person was still his friend. When Stark saw this, he immediately understood who the real owner was and came to Thor's side with a playful smile. Successfully gain the other person's favor after a conversation. I have to say that Stark, who has not turned on the poisonous tongue attribute, is still very likable. Loki on the side looked at Yehu deeply, not knowing whether the other person was talking nonsense or could really control the space gem. An hour later, everyone stood on the top floor of Stark Tower. Potts and Jane Foster were wearing mechas made by Stark. Although Thor had repeatedly said that Asgard was adapted to human survival, Stark always insisted on his own view. Yehu began to imagine the location of Asgard in his mind based on Thor's description. The next second, a light blue light door appeared in front of everyone. The moment they stepped out of the light door, a group of Asgard warriors used their weapons to the weapon was pointed at everyone, but when he saw Thor, he immediately put the weapon down and bowed respectfully. Naturally taking over the task of escorting Loki, Stark took a deep breath and then opened his visor, showing a hint of surprise on his face. The air quality here is indeed suitable for human habitation. Along the way, Stark kept talking. He asked the guard to ask about unfamiliar items around him. The guard looked at Thor's calm eyes and suppressed the thought in his heart that he would punch the Iron Man in front of him to death. Solve doubts. As soon as Yehu entered the hall, he felt a coercion wrapping around him. He subconsciously used the energy of the space gem to disperse it. Odin's eyes flashed slightly on the throne and he said calmly, welcome all guests from afar. To Asgard. Thor made a fist with his right hand and placed it on his heart, bowed and saluted, then said in a deep voice, Father. Stark and others bowed to Odin in the same manner. Yehu just nodded towards the figure on the throne. Odin didn't say anything when he saw this. This is the treatment that a strong man deserves. After some conversation, Odin then turned his gaze to Loki and said calmly. You will be put in a dungeon and no one will come to visit you. Frigga, who was standing aside, took a step forward and glanced sideways at Stark. The others hesitated for a second and then took their steps back. There were outsiders here. She didn't want to have a dispute with Odin, which would affect the majesty of the Father of the Gods. Frigga planned to plead with Odin later. After the guards pushed Loki down, Odin stood up and slowly came to Yehu's side and whispered, I feel the aura of the Rubik's Cube on you. Can I ask you a favor? What's busy? Yehu looked at Odin with a wary expression, fearing that the other party might try to use your head on your neck, and then he raised the eternal spear and stabbed himself to death on the spot. A warm smile appeared on Odin's face and he said softly, our rainbow bridge. It requires huge amounts of energy to be destroyed and reassembled. At this point, Odin looked at Thor with reproachful eyes. If it weren't for his stupid son, the rainbow bridge would not be destroyed and Asgard would not be passive. Yehu thought for a second and then said in a deep voice, can you help me? Question, but I want the eternal fire. No problem. Odin nodded. As long as the other party repairs the rainbow bridge and takes away a ray of eternal fire, it is not too much. With Yehu, a mobile endless energy source, Asgard's craftsmen quickly repaired the rainbow bridge, and the belligerent trustee immediately came to the teleportation platform to let Heimdall send himself to the battlefield. He wanted to end this war as soon as possible and restore peace to the Nine Realms. Stark, who was very curious about aliens, licked his face and followed Thor, preparing to see the humans living in other countries. Odin called a guard to let him. The other party took Yehu to the treasure house to get the eternal fire. Watching the eternal fire guard being carried away, he blinked his eyes. He recalled Odin's order in his mind and found that the other party did not clearly state its weight. Thinking of the repaired Bifrost guard, he felt deeply about King Odin's generosity. Understanding. After getting what he wanted, Yehu came to the palace and asked the two women if they wanted to go back with him. Jane Foster directly refused and said that she would study here for a while. Potts hesitated for a second and asked Jane Foster to give it. Tony said a word and then followed Yehu into the space door. Chapter 67 War. Potts was shocked by what Yi and Hu saw and heard this time when they returned to Stark Tower. However, this mood was soon overwhelmed by the pile of documents. Yehu smiled and said goodbye to Potts and took the elevator to a room. Building. At the same time, Hill at SHIELD headquarters knocked on the door of the office with a report and whispered, "Director, this is Dr. Jane Foster's research report." Nick Fury reached out to take the report, glanced at the data on it, threw it aside, and said in a cold tone, "Is there any follow-up to what happened in Stark Tower before?" Just now, the figures of Yehu and Potts came from the satellite. Hill crossed his hands in front of him and spoke very calmly. Nick Fury's eyes flashed slightly and said in a deep voice, "How are you doing with Jessica's brainwashing? Can you use the other party to find out information about Yehu?" Hill shook his head. His expression was a little tangled. Nick Fury waved his hand to ask the opponent to step back. This trump card had to be slowly polished before it could work wonders. At the same time, two figures landed in the factory where the ether particles appeared. This is where the ether particles last appeared. Malekith used the spacecraft to carefully scan the nearby space to find the hidden entrance. 10 minutes later, Malekith stopped what he was doing and used the brain connection in the spacecraft. Networks on Earth began querying this location. 5 minutes later, Malekith drove the spaceship to leave the Earth and prepare to go to other borders, preparing to incite everyone to join him in opposing Odin's rule. He couldn't find the ether particles and could not survive and die in the Nine Kingdoms just by relying on the Dark Elves in the spaceship. There is no difference. It is better to die vigorously in battle than to continue to linger. As soon as the spaceship arrived at Malekith outside of Vanaheim, he saw a colorful beam of light landing on the planet. After hesitating for a moment, he drove the spacecraft into the interior of the planet to prepare to unite with the Vana Protoss to resist Asgard. Thor and Stark landed on the battlefield together. The two had previously fought off the interstellar predators that invaded Nidavellir and were somewhat familiar with each other. He quickly fought his way out of the rebels and joined the Asgardian army led by Sif. Just when everyone thought that the war would end after Thor arrived, several 3-meter-tall cursed warriors fell from the sky and punched Stark, stopping the arrogant Thor. The originally panicked rebels once again gathered to rush towards Asgard's army. The addition of the cursed warriors gave the rebels top-notch combat power and soon defeated Asgard's army. Thor fought 3 cursed warriors alone and beat the opponent to the point where they were unable to fight back. But Stark was pulled to the ground by 2 cursed warriors and was beaten to death. Without supplies, he could only rely on palm cannons to fight back, but the attack on the cursed warriors was no different than scratching an itch. Heimdall, who was observing the battle on the Rainbow Bridge, looked at the cursed warriors in the crowd and thought of a legend in his mind and ran away quickly. "Go to the main hall and tell Odin what happened." Dark Elf. Odin murmured in a low voice and stood up from the throne. A set of bright silver armor covered his body. He held the eternal spear and walked down the steps step by step. He came to the outside of the hall and rode on the 8-legged horse. "Go ahead to the Rainbow Bridge." When passing by a civilian residential area, some veteran soldiers looked at Odin in armor and immediately returned to the room, picked up weapons and followed the opponents back. When they arrived at the Rainbow Bridge, thousands of veterans had gathered behind Odin. This was the king of the gods. Appeal. Thor, who was fighting with 3 cursed warriors, felt a strong wind coming from behind. Just as he was trying to avoid it, he was hugged by the cursed warrior on the side. The next second, the two of them flew 5 meters away and landed heavily on the ground. Malekith's figure appeared at the place where Thor was standing before. Looking at the embarrassed Thor, he whispered, "There is a familiar aura about you. Who are you, Bal Odinson? Who are you? How do you know my grandfather's name?" Thor used Mjolnir to suppress the cursed warrior beneath him and stood up and looked at Malekith with a serious face. The suppressed cursed warrior kept struggling but could not break free from Mjolnir's suppression. Ha ha ha! I actually met Baal's grandson. Malekith said coldly with a flash of madness in his eyes, back then, your grandfather ruined my life's work. Today, I will use your blood to wash away the infliction he imposed on me. Shame on me! As soon as he finished speaking, Malekith appeared in front of Thor and hit the opponent's chest with his palm. Thor flew backwards and stretched out his hand to summon Mjolnir and hit the pursuing figure with a backhand, but Malekith was holding the Meow hammer with one hand. He then punched Thor away as he stared at him in shock. How could you possibly lift Mjolnir? Thor roared uncontrollably, unable to hide the shock in his heart. Malekith firmly held the struggling Meowth hammer with a disdainful smile on his face and said softly. Don't tell me it's just a dead planet core. Even if it's alive, I can destroy it. Although Malekith's words were very domineering, it was still a bit difficult for him to destroy a planet. What he described was that he had ether particles back then. Now that his strength has seriously declined, he is no longer the dark person he once was. The Elf King has no problem dealing with a little guy who is just starting out. After coming back to his senses, Thor began to fight steadily with Malekith. After 2 minutes, Thor gradually regained control of the situation and imitated Tony and began to disturb the opponent's mind with his words. A trash like you is worthy of fighting against my grandfather. With a trash leader like you, no wonder the Dark Elves were exterminated. Ah! Damn Asgardians! If that despicable guy Baal hadn't used the Rainbow Bridge to steal the ether particles, I would have unified the 9 realms. Thor took advantage of Malekith's distraction and hit the opponent's chest with his Meowth hammer, knocking the opponent away. Then he triggered the thunder from the sky to hit Malekith in mid-air, but this set of attacks only caused damage to the opponent's body. A charred mark appeared on the armor. Thor raised the Meow hammer and pointed it at Malekith. Just as he was about to taunt a few words, 5 cursed warriors surrounded Thor. Feeling the concussive force coming from the armor, Thor loudly cursed, "This is the Dark Elves' combat style." Malekith ignored Thor's taunts and now he just wanted to kill the Asgardian. Just when Malekith was about to hit Thor hard from behind, a colorful light beam enveloped Thor and pushed Malekith, and several of the cursed warriors fought back together. Father! Thor looked at the 8-legged god riding on the armored Odin and felt his face flush a little. When he thought of his father seeing his most humiliating moment, he wanted to use the Meow hammer to smash out a palace and hide in it. Odin ignored the ground. The silly son turned his eyes to Malekith and whispered. King of the Dark Elves, I am willing to sign a peace treaty with you on behalf of Asgard and help you rebuild Vat-Alheim. Asgardians, put away your disgusting face. Malekith glared at Odin and said in a deep voice after feeling the opponent's power, unless you can return the ether particles to me, we will meet on the battlefield. I have no news of ether particles. Odin sighed and shook his head. Just as he was about to continue persuading, Malekith raised his hand and interrupted. Chapter 68 The Dark Elves are defeated. Odin held up the Eternal Spear to block Malekith's attack, and said calmly, Are you really not considering it? The old Odin longed for peace and would not use force if things could be resolved through negotiation. The benefits brought by war were far less valuable than peace. This truth was understood only after he unified the 9 realms. For this reason, he did not hesitate to seal his daughter. Use actions to tell everyone in the 9 realms that Odin is a benevolent monarch. I said that unless the ether particles are returned, I, the Dark Elf, will fight you to the last man in Asgard. Malekith roared angrily and used the energy in his body to rush towards Odin. The battle between the 2 Heavenly Father-level powerhouses shook the entire battlefield. Except for some red-eyed soldiers, everyone put away their weapons and stayed away from the 2 men. As soon as the crowd dispersed, several red-eyed warriors came to their senses, but in the next second they were beaten into powder by an energy shock wave. Odin guided Malekith to fly outside the planet to minimize the loss. Thor took the opportunity to lead people to surround the 5 cursed warriors and prepare to regain the lost face. The originally clear sky became extremely dark during the battle between Odin, and dull collision sounds came from the air occasionally. After a few drops of blood fell and the battle was over, Thor looked up at the gloomy sky with a worried look in his eyes. He knew that the injury Odin suffered from activating the dark energy device had not healed. An hour later, the sky became clear again, and Odin appeared in front of everyone riding an 8-legged horse. The armor on his body was stained with blood. But his expression was still so cold that those who looked at him subconsciously lowered their posture. Long live Asgard! Long live Odin! Thor excitedly raised the Meow hammer and roared loudly, with a proud look on his face. In his heart, his father was omnipotent. Asgard will always protect Vanaheim. Odin raised the eternal spear with a very majestic expression. The next second, a colorful beam of light enveloped him. After returning to the Rainbow Bridge, Odin fell directly from the eight-legged horse. His face turned pale at a speed visible to the naked eye. The sea beside him upon seeing this, Heimdall quickly walked towards Odin and prepared to reach out to help him. No, Heimdall. Don't tell Thor about this. Odin raised his hand to stop Heimdall's movements, stood up with the eternal spear vigorously, took a few breaths, then mounted the eight-legged horse and walked toward the divine realm like a victorious general. Heimdall waited until the opponent's figure had gone away. Respond to Thor's call and teleport the army back to the Bifrost. Some veterans cheered Odin's name and strode after the retreating figure. Soon everyone in the god's domain began to shout "Long live Odin!" Thor, who was walking on the street, watched his father's aloof back disappear at the gate of the palace and swore in his heart. From now on, I want to be a great king like my father. A figure in the crowd suddenly caught Thor's attention. Looking at Jane Foster's smiling face, Thor's face showed a bright smile. He strode to Jane Foster's side and hugged her slender waist, dancing and meowing. Hammer takes the opponent for a spin in the air. Frigga, who was standing on the balcony of the palace, looked at the two figures passing by with a trace of regret in her eyes. She preferred Sif, who grew up with Thor, to be her daughter-in-law rather than a human being. The human lifespan is too short, and he doesn't want Thor to feel sad in the future. But her stupid son was too persistent. After many attempts to persuade her to no avail, she had no choice but to give up. When she discovered that Odin had not returned to the room, Frigga's eyes flashed slightly and her body gradually faded and disappeared into the room. The next second, Frigga's figure appeared. Appearing in the underground cell, Loki's face flashed with joy but soon returned to his previous indifference. What's wrong? The Great Queen actually comes to visit me, a criminal. Aren't you afraid of the punishment of Odin, the father of the gods? Frigga ignored Loki's sarcastic remarks and slowly walked up to him, reaching out and caressing Loki's face and whispered, "You've lost weight." Loki's breathing gradually worsened and he could no longer control the emotions on his face. He threw himself into Frigga's arms and choked, "I almost succeeded. Why can't I sit on that throne? Can't rule Midgard? Can't get the chance to compete with me? A fair chance for Thor." Frigga sighed and patted Loki's back gently. All she could do was listen. As a wife, she couldn't resist Odin's dictatorship just like she couldn't stop Odin from exiling Hela. After narrating what was in his heart, Loki regained his previous calm demeanor and gently broke away from Frigga's arms. A blush flashed across his face. Frigga looked at the figure in front of him with loving eyes and whispered, "Loki, you will always be my son. I will plead for you and let your father let you out as soon as possible." "He is not my father." Loki looked at Frigga with a stubborn expression, eyes full of indignation, but did not refute the first half of Frigga's words. "Alas, your father also has his own reasons." Frigga looked at Loki, who turned around with a sad look on his face, shook his head, and whispered, "I will make time to see you. If you need anything, I can tell me." Feeling the familiar aura disappear, Loki slowly turned around and looked at where Frigga was standing before. A warmth surged in his heart. Frigga was the only one who treated everyone equally since childhood, but he, who did not have Thor's hammer, gained. Frigga has all the magic inheritance, but this does not affect his determination to be an assassin. Odin returned to the palace and fell into a deep sleep again, but this time he entered Odin's sleep after arranging everything. Thor held the Meow hammer and served as the temporary king. As Thor quelled the war in the Nine Realms, his throne became more and more stable. Everyone also called him the Prince of Asgard to the Lord of the Divine Realm. Jane Foster relied on her identity as the future princess to run amok in the Divine Realm. She often pestered Heimdall to ask about the deeds of the Rainbow Bridge in order to better complete it. Own research. Yehu, who was eating at home, looked at the green figure appearing on the TV and said with emotion, "You finally came out as the Green Goblin." Seeing the Green Goblin, Yehu reminded him of Spider-Man. He didn't know whether little Peter had been bitten by a spider. At the same time, Norman Osborn, who had completed the destruction, returned to his villa, took off his armor and slowly walked to the sofa to sit down. The Osborn family has been researching a serum. Ever since his father saw the power of the Superman serum, he began to research a drug to enhance physical fitness, but the side effects of the drug soon took his life. Norman, after taking over the family business, he discovered his father's research. As a young and energetic man, he injected himself with serum to prepare to crack the culprit that caused him to lose his father. At first, he relied on the intelligence bonus brought by the serum to stabilize the shaken Osborne group, but soon negative emotions emerged in his body, and these emotions became more powerful as time went by. Norman searched for many solutions but could not solve it until he fused the Hulk's blood into the serum. Those diverse negative emotions began to slowly transform into rage. Although they still affected his temperament, they became controllable. Chapter 69 Green Goblin. Harry hid on the second floor and watched his leisurely father below. The panic in his heart gradually subsided. The day before yesterday, he found his father tinkering with something in the secret room. He added some other things to the potion to show off. In the end, instead of waiting for his father's praise, there was a big explosion. Just when he thought he was in trouble, Norman let out a burst of laughter, put on the Green Goblin armor and rushed out of the villa. He has been disliked by his father since he was a child because he killed his mother. Over the years, he has always wanted to gain his father's approval. In order to attract his father's attention, Harry kept practicing physical abuse. However, Norman, who was obsessed with research, did not notice the changes in his son at all. Harry looked at the figure leaning on the sofa and finally couldn't hold back the emotion in his heart and said in a deep voice, "Father, if you hate me so much, why did you raise me up?" Norman, who had just finished his rampage mode, was startled by the sudden voice. When he looked back and found that it was Harry, he was relieved. He didn't want anyone to discover his identity. Looking at Harry's stubborn face, Norman fell silent. Seconds later whispered, "Your grandfather once developed a serum that can strengthen the brain and body but has strong side effects and is hereditary." Speaking of this, Norman paused slightly, remembering the arrogance of his youth, and couldn't help but soften his tone, and continued, "I have been studying how to solve this side effect for these years, and I don't tell you so as not to burden you, but now there is nothing. Same thing, I developed an antidote that has some side effects but can effectively suppress genetic diseases." At the same time, the TV began to play the video of Norman's sunrise destruction in the city. Harry looked at the various funny things in the screen. The corners of Norman's mouth twitched slightly. Norman, who was sitting on the sofa, felt that his cheeks were a little hot. He had not been touched before. When his identity was revealed, he could still pretend to be nonchalant and comment with his son on what the Green Goblin had done, but now he just wanted to dig out a bomb shelter with his toes. Ahem, cough, cough, I think this antidote can be better. Norman picked up the remote control and turned off the TV. He stood up, patted his son on the shoulder and whispered, "It's getting late, go get some rest. I still need to do research." After Norman left, Harry slowly came back to his senses. He remembered the scene in which he couldn't die despite being crazy about taking drugs. He knew in his heart that it should be the result of the serum. He hesitated for a few seconds after thinking of the things he had put in the laboratory before. Lee chose to confess to his father. After learning the situation, Norman's eyes flashed with surprise, and his mouth showed a proud smile. He patted Harry's shoulder hard and said in a deep voice, "It seems that this antidote is destined to be researched by my father and son." A hint of surprise flashed across Harry's face. This was the first time he was recognized by his father. He suddenly felt a little closer to each other. At the same time, Peter Parker was having a headache about his changes. Since the last time the school organized a research visit to Columbia University, unfortunately, after being bitten by a spider, she suffered various health problems. This made Peter, who was about to end high school and enter college life, feel desperate. The emergence of this ability made him already unpopular even worse. His inner kindness and inferiority made him suffer very much until he saw his neighbor Mary Jane. The light that illuminated his soul was picked up in a Porsche by the rich young man who often bullied him, and his mood changed somewhat. Looking through the used car newspaper, Peter was attracted by an underground boxing advertisement. He could get $3,000 in 3 minutes of playing, which was enough money for him to buy a low-end used car. Thinking of Mary Jane's smile, Peter Parker decided to participate in this competition. Although he had not tested his strength, but with his reflexes, he was confident that he could last for 3 minutes. After Peter Parker filled out the registration letter and put it in the mailbox, one piece came out an hour later. He drew the red and blue design with a black spider pattern on the chest. Peter nodded with satisfaction and started to make the suit. After dinner, Yehu sat on the sofa alone and waited for Jessica to come back. Since she joined S.H.I.E.L.D., she has started a life of an agent from 6 to 4 nights a day, all year round. However, Jessica still feels that such a life is very fulfilling. The other party called during lunch and said he was coming back to stay one night. At 10:30 in the night, there was a crisp sound of opening the door. Jessica pressed the switch on the side, and then exclaimed, "Boss! Why don't you turn on the lights when you are sitting alone in the living room at night?" Yehu calmly looked at the opponent's meatballs shaking up and down and said in a calm tone, "When are you going to end this game of house?" "Boss! How many times have I told you that this is a job? It allows me to help more people in need." A look of longing appeared in Jessica's eyes. She was once controlled by the Purple Man. She did a lot of bad things, and she thought it was God's punishment for not letting her die with her parents and brother in a car accident. It wasn't until Nick Fury opened a new door for her that Jessica discovered that she could use her superpowers to help people in trouble. The previous battle convinced her of Nick Fury's theory that the Earth is unsafe, and persuaded Matt and Luke Cage to join S.H.I.E.L.D. to fight for all mankind. Yehu listened to Jessica's words and mourned 3 seconds of silence for Matt and Matt. People like Nick Fury are too controlling and always want to hold everything in their hands without thinking about whether they have that ability. After hesitating for a second, Yehu stood up and opened a space door in front of him, turning his head and saying to Jessica, "Follow me, I've got some Christmas gifts for you." Jessica followed Yehu into the space door without thinking. She believed that the other party would not harm her. Looking at the two busy people in the laboratory, Jessica showed a trace of confusion on her face, but she still followed Yehu honestly. "A room. There are some equipment here. You can pick some favorite things and use them for self-defense." Yehu pointed at the energy weapon behind him and spoke very calmly. Jessica stepped forward and picked up a giant energy gun and gave it a sideways look. Yehu pointed at the room to the side and said softly, "You can test the power over there." Jessica nodded, picked up a few items and walked towards the next door. Yehu slowly came to Yvonne Vank and took out the dusty galaxy heart from his backpack and whispered, "This thing is said to be an energy source. You take it and study it deeply." "Yes, boss." Yvonne reached out and took the heart of the galaxy and saluted Yehu. After asking, the big boss not far away came to Yehu and said with some embarrassment, "Boss, we need to expand the scope of the research laboratory." In order to develop his intelligence, Stern immersed himself in the ocean of knowledge all day long, and unknowingly carried out many experiments. As a result, the space in this secret base was completely insufficient. Yehu looked at the occupied rooms around him and sighed. "Summon the handsome boy from Skull Island." Roar! King Kong, who thought there was a fight, held up his battle axe with an excited look on his face. 3 minutes later, the handsome boy from Skull Island waved his giant axe downwards with a numb expression and began to dig a new space. Stern sat on the homemade aircraft and directed Ivan's assistant. Robots move dirt. Chapter 70 Underground Boxing. Jessica, who was testing the weapon, was affected by the sound of digging and looked out. Seeing King Kong's height of 100 meters, she swallowed back the curse words in her mouth. Yehu strolled up to Jessica, pointed at King Kong and said softly, "You can call him Skull Island handsome boy." Jessica nodded dully. The two stood at the door and chatted for a while. In the end, Jessica did not accept Yehu's persuasion. She took the weapon and crossed the space door back to the villa, preparing to take the weapon to the S.H.I.E.L.D. research room tomorrow. Assembly line production arms all mankind. Peter Parker, who received a reply 3 days later, happily ran downstairs. Ben Parker, who was discussing with his wife how to enlighten adolescents, got up and drove Peter outside the library. He looked at his irritable nephew and said softly, "Let's talk. You stay in your room all day doing some weird experiments and refuse to do housework. Your Aunt May and I are very worried about you. I heard that you beat up a classmate a few days ago. That was the one who made the first move." When Peter mentioned this, he remembered the scene where the other party bullied him before. This was also the happiest thing he encountered after mutating. At this moment, seeing his uncle's preaching attitude, Peter's heart immediately an unknown fire rose up and roared loudly. "Do you want me to run away? To be a poor guy who just hides in the corner and waits for someone else's redemption? You shouldn't run away." Ben Parker didn't know how to persuade his nephew for a while. After thinking about it, he said softly, "Listen Parker, I understand your mood. I have experienced this when I was your age." Thing. Peter's brows furrowed and a hint of impatience flashed in his eyes. He didn't believe that his uncle would go through what he suffered, and said in a bad tone, "No, you have never experienced the suffering I have suffered. Peter, the choices you make in the past few years will determine your future. Don't go astray. The person who fights with you may deserve it, but we have no right to beat others. You must remember that with great power comes greater responsibility. Big. Are you afraid that I will become a criminal? Peter looked at his uncle in disbelief and said angrily, Don't worry, uncle, everything is different now. I will solve these things myself, don't lecture me. I don't want to preach, I'm not your father either. Then don't pretend you are. Peter shouted angrily, his eyes full of anger. He had been ostracized by the children around him ever since he lost his parents. Looking at his nephew's cold eyes, Ben Parker sighed and said, I will be there at 10 o'clock. Come pick you up. Seeing his uncle's lonely expression, Peter felt a pang in his heart and subconsciously wanted to admit his mistake, but the stubbornness of adolescence prevented him from bowing his head. It wasn't until his uncle's car turned the corner and disappeared that Peter Parker looked back and decided to apologize to Uncle Ben later. Peter took off his coat to reveal the homemade red suit underneath and went to the underground boxing gym. Looking at the strong man on the ring who was hit hard in the heart by an elbow, his brows raised and he was worried about whether he could withstand it for 3 minutes. The black ant who came to the registration office to register looked at the thin Peter and said softly, Little guy, you'd better go back. You have to understand that if you are injured in this game, the organizer will not compensate you. I see. Looking at Peter's exposed eyes, the black ant sighed helplessly and then wrote on the form the title Human Spider designed by Peter himself. 3 minutes later, the overlord of the ring, Big Mac, eliminated a challenger again, holding up a hand as thick as an adult's thigh. Arms screaming. Peter took a deep breath and slowly came to the ring. At the same time, the iron cage above suddenly fell down and covered the 2 people inside. Peter Parker came to the edge of the ring and shouted downwards, Hey! You made a mistake. I didn't register for the cage match. But his shouts were soon drowned out by the shouts of death from the surrounding crowd. Big Mac looked at Peter with disdain and then slammed into him. At the prompt of the danger sensor, Peter jumped hard and stuck to the cage. Looking at the dented fence hit by the Big Mac, his heart skipped a beat, and he was somewhat thankful that he had dodged quickly. He still viewed things with his previous thinking that he would definitely not be able to resist such an attack. The furious Big Mac reached out to take the folding stool handed over by his assistant and knocked the stunned Peter down on the ring in 2 or 3 strokes. Big Mac threw away the folding stool, picked up Peter's thigh and slammed him against the fence, roaring at the surrounding audience. Another assistant screamed and handed Big Mac a crowbar, ready to watch Peter's skin and flesh being torn apart. Seeing the crowbar coming towards his face, Peter subconsciously raised his foot and kicked Big Mac in the abdomen. With just 2 kicks, the opponent fell to his knees on the ground. Peter kicked Big Mac's body crazily until the opponent fell to the ground. Only then stopped attacking. The surroundings fell into deathly silence, and then a group of spectators loudly shouted the title of Spider-Man. Peter, who encountered this scene for the first time, felt happy in his heart. He felt that the money was pretty good. Earning $3,000 in 3 minutes was just the same for him. It's the same as a free gift. Why is it only 100 yuan? Didn't the advertisement say 3,000? Peter Parker looked at the figure opposite who was counting money with a blank expression. The person in charge said with a sneer at the corner of his mouth, Watch it again, idiot. 3 minutes and 3 it only took you 2 minutes to get 1,000 yuan, which is already good, so get out of here. I need this money. What does that have to do with me? Seeing the other party's fearless attitude, Peter took a deep breath, picked up the 100 yuan on the table, turned around and pushed open the office door. He passed by a thin man. The person in charge who was counting the money with his head down was hit by the thin man with a bag. Said with some dissatisfaction. Hey! What are you doing? Put the money in. The black muzzle of the man's gun blocked the person in charge's next words. Peter stood at the top of the stairs and suddenly heard a quarrel. He turned around and saw the man running towards him holding a pile of money. The person in charge looked at Peter standing at the elevator entrance and remembered the other party's strength and shouted loudly. Hey man, help! There's a robbery! After hesitating for a while, Peter turned aside to let the man enter the elevator. The person in charge came to Peter and said in disbelief, Why did you let him go when you could have stopped him? Peter shrugged and said indifferently, What does this have to do with me? With one sentence, the person in charge was choked and could only turn around and leave. Peter felt a lot of relief in his heart when he walked out of the underground boxing gym. Looking at the wall of people in the distance, Peter felt a bad feeling in his heart. With a premonition, he carefully pushed away the crowd and looked at the familiar figure on the ground and cried out sadly. Uncle Ben! What's going on? Someone was hijacking a car and he was shot. A female police officer shook her head unbearably. Ben Parker, who was on his deathbed, heard several familiar calls and reluctantly opened his eyes to look at his nephew who looked sad and whispered. Peter! I'm here. Uncle Ben! Chapter 71 Transformation. Peter held his uncle's hand hard and looked at the other person's eyes that were gradually dimming, with endless murderous intent in his heart. At this moment, the policeman's walkie-talkie rang. Attention all units, the gangster is heading towards 5th Avenue. 3 police cars are pursuing him. Please call nearby police officers for support. Peter held back the tears in his eyes and stood up, walked to a side alley, took off his coat, revealed the battle uniform underneath, put on a hood, swung on the swing and chased towards 5th Avenue. 3 minutes later, Peter discovered the familiar car. After a fight, he forced it into a factory building. He turned his head to avoid the bullets fired by the gangsters. With the help of the light, Peter looked at the familiar face and stirred up a storm in his heart. He frightened the other person. Amidst the calls, he lifted the man in the air, took off his mask and said coldly. Why did you kill my uncle? The man looked at Peter's face and shouted in panic, Don't hurt me. Give me a chance. Did you give my uncle a chance? Yes. After Peter Parker roared angrily, there was a trace of hesitation in his heart. He had never killed anyone and he did not dare to kill anyone. At this moment, facing the murderer of his relatives, he felt like he had no way to start. While Peter was stunned, the man raised his pistol and said softly. Bye now. As soon as he finished speaking, Peter, who had a spider sense, quickly broke his wrist. The severe pain caused the man to slowly take 2 steps back. He tripped on a water pipe on the ground and fell from the 3rd floor. Peter looked at the corpse on the ground through the broken glass and couldn't help it for a long time. Calm. Hearing the sound of the police breaking in, Peter climbed up the wall and quickly escaped from the scene. He came to the relief on the top floor of a building. Thinking of the quarrel with his uncle in the morning, he felt endless regret in his heart. In the early hours of the morning, Peter pushed open the door. May, who was sitting in the living room, quickly stood up and came to Peter, hugging her only relative into her arms. Sitting in the living room, Yehu put his left hand on his chin and switched TV channels in boredom. After hesitating for a second, he decided to do some tasks to store some points so that he could better integrate gems in the future. After raising 10,000 points, go to Asgard to find Thor and ask him to help find the whereabouts of Yondu, so that he can participate in the plot of the Guardians of the Galaxy and obtain the Power Stone, and perfectly mobilize the infinite energy in his body to explode into the father level, the strength that a strong person should have. Looking at the dense world names on the screen, he focused his eyes on an image and silently thought to confirm. After a strange fluctuation, Yehu came to a forest. In the distance, 3 young people were waving to the villagers behind him and shouting loudly. Don't worry, village chief. The 3 of us will definitely make money to save the village. Looking at the 3 silhouettes in the sunset, the villagers had an expression of relief on their faces. He believed that the 3 of them would be able to make a name for themselves in the imperial capital. After all, they were the strongest people in the village. Tajmi walked on the road with Yiyaz and Seu, full of hope for the future. Yehu followed the 3 of them, shook his head and whispered, I once dreamed of traveling to the end of the world with a sword, but it disappeared as soon as I left the village too. The next day, a group of robbers blocked the road and robbed them. The 3 of them agreed to meet in the imperial capital and then escape separately. 3 days later, Yehu came to the imperial capital. He used the money he gained from killing bandits on the road to stay in a hotel and waited patiently for his death to return to the imperial capital. Tatsumai, who stepped into the imperial capital, came to the barracks to prepare to join the army. When he learned that he had to start from the bottom, he pulled out the long sword behind his back to let the other party test his strength, so as to obtain the position of officer, but was kicked out by the person in charge of the barracks. Go out. While walking on the street, Tajmi was defrauded of all her money by Liane, a member of Night Raid, using her position as squad leader. Tatsumai, who was walking on the street at night, somewhat understood the meaning of what the other party said before leaving. He sat at the corner of the street with a sigh and missed his time in the village very much. But remembering the situation in the village, Tajmi cheered up and prepared to go to the barracks tomorrow to enroll in the army. He believed that he would be reused sooner or later with his own strength. The fair and beautiful figure's cheeks were slightly red. Don't you have a place to sleep? Why don't you come to my house? Listening to the girl's delicate voice, Tajmi remembered Liane whispering before, I don't have money. Keek, if you have money, you will definitely not sleep here. Come on, I will take you home. Alia showed a sweet smile on her face, but she was thinking about how to deal with this outsider in her heart. Remembering the appearance of those toys crying bitterly, Alia subconsciously clamped her legs and showed a flush on her face. Tajmi, who lowered her head, did not see it all. After being warmly received by Alia's family, Tatsumi couldn't help feeling that there are still kind-hearted people in the imperial capital. After eating, Alia came to a warehouse where many toys were placed. Covered with scars, the amiable smile on Alia's face gradually turned ferocious. She picked up a red-hot iron and pressed it on the girl's body. Shehu's body twitched slightly and her breath became more lethargic. After some recuperation, Alia left the warehouse with a sweet smile on her face again. Yehu left the hotel early the next morning and came to the street to enjoy the imperial capital. Liane, who was outside the cafe, slowly put down his teacup, and the corners of his mouth raised slightly, thinking that there was another fat sheep in his heart. Thinking of the gold coins that the little boy contributed yesterday, Liane began to look forward to the new fat sheep that could serve the children in the slums. After buying some winter clothes, Yehu stopped and said in a cold voice after walking 2 streets, aren't you ready to come out and say something after following me for so long? Hehe, this little guy is so handsome. Is this your first time in the imperial capital? Do you need a guide? As long as you pay me, I can meet all your requirements. Yehu stared at Liane with a sense of vigilance in his heart. He did not look handsome. The person who could raise the face of a passerby to such an extent without conscience must be demanding a lot. No, I don't like you. Yehu shook his head indifferently and turned to walk to a nearby tavern to inquire about Estetha's itinerary. A trace of astonishment flashed in Liane's eyes. Looking down and unable to see his toes, this was the first time that he had been so decisively rejected by someone. Brother, don't go. Liane smiled and came to Yehu's side, making an embracing gesture with both hands. He wanted to hug the other person's arm and use his own pride to smooth the other person's edges. Yehu's eyes turned cold. Mental power forms a barrier to block the opponent's movements. The moment he felt resistance, Liane immediately pretended to be repelled and said with some confusion, What's going on? There are unclean things around here, brother, you have to protect me. Yehu quietly looked at the familiar face and said hesitantly, Which thunder are you, Night Attack, right? Seeing that Yehu knew his name, Liane began to compare in his mind the victims who had been deceived by him in the past, but when the word Night Attack appeared, Liane's eyes instantly became extremely sharp. Who are you? How do you know my identity? Chapter 72 Is Death. She had never revealed the identity of the night raid members to outsiders. Thinking of the disaster that would happen to the children in the slums if their identities were exposed, Liane immediately put her hands on the Taigo King of Beasts, preparing to transform and kill the man in front of her. I advise you to be kind. If you use the Taigu, I will think that you are challenging me. Yehu stared at Liane with a sneer on his lips and said in a deep voice, Those who challenge me will only have one fate. Feeling Yehu's aura, Liane knew for a moment that he had met a master. After hesitating for a second, he slowly put down his hand and said helplessly, Please don't tell others about my identity, otherwise. It's not impossible if you want me to keep it a secret. Yehu looked at Liane with a joking face and said slowly, Ms., you don't want your identity to be exposed, right? You shouldn't be able to bear the consequences. What do you want to do? Liane subconsciously protected his chest with his hands and looked at Yehu with a wary face and said coldly, Don't even think about using this to threaten me to do anything weird. Yehu looked at Liane up and down for a moment and then concluded that he was not as good as Estetha. He said in a calm tone, I need you to find out information about Estetha for me. This is my address and let me know if you have any news. Liane took the paper entry with a dull expression and sent the opponent into the tavern. He rubbed his right hand back and forth on the King of Beasts, thinking about the probability of killing the opponent. 10 seconds later, Liane put the note in his arms and turned around to leave. Listening to the suppressed complaints in the tavern, Yehu understood that the empire was rotten to the core and that ordinary means could not turn the tide. At night, several figures outside the Arya Manor stood in the sky. If you look carefully, you can use the moonlight to see the people under their feet. Thin lines. Why are you so distracted? Is there something on your mind? Lubbock's voice made Liane come back to his senses and remember what happened before. After hesitating for a second, he said softly, "I'm fine. I just lied to a stranger yesterday and was a little curious about him." The expression, "You are as bad as ever." Ma Yin curled her lips in disdain. The two people, who had different ideas, kept tit for tat. Listening to the quarrel between the two, Brand shook his head and said softly, "Stop arguing. The mission is important." A group of people slowly sneaked into the manor and prepared to kill the owner here. They already had evidence of the other party's crime. Since the law could not judge the other party, they would use their own methods to give justice to the victims. Tajmi woke up with a murderous rage, picked up the long sword on the bedside and walked to the corridor. The night raid organization that specializes in hunting nobles flashed through her mind that the big guard brother told her in the morning. Thinking of Alia's sweet smile, Tajmi decided to defend the opponent with the sword in your hand. The guards in the manor were instantly wiped out by Brand and Chi Tong. Tajmi chased Alia all the way to the outside of the warehouse and faced Chi Tong who was following her. She drew her sword and looked at Tajmi's face. Chi Tong judged that the opponent was not within the scope of the mission, jumped up, stepped on Tajmi's head, came to the last guard and killed the opponent. How could it be so strong? Tajmi swallowed with disbelief in his eyes. He thought that his ability to hunt down first-level dangerous species alone was considered very powerful in the imperial capital, but he didn't expect to encounter anyone. The killers in the organization were all better than him, but in order to repay Alia's kindness, Tajmi still waved her sword towards Kai Tong. 3 minutes later, Liane came to the two of them and looked at Tajmi who could persist under Kai Tong for so long. A flash of surprise flashed in his eyes. Thinking of the money he had defrauded from the other party, he quickly reached out and grabbed the one who wanted to kill the other party. Kai Tong said softly, "I owe this guy a favor. So let's pay him back here." Kai Tong has always been very tolerant towards his companions. Hearing this, he immediately stopped his movements and put the Taigu's one kill into the scabbard. Liane took a few steps forward and kicked open the warehouse door. He took Tajmi inside and watched as she was hung in the air. Seu, who had been dead for a long time, and Iaz, who was used as a virus container, remembered the heroic words of the three when they set off. Tajmi felt her heart filled with panic. After killing Alia, Tajmi stood there with a look of confusion on her face. After some thought, Liane decided to invite the other party to join the night attack. There were very few people who could fight against Red Eyes and survive. With the blessing of becoming the king of beasts, Liane effortlessly held Tajmi in his arms, came in front of everyone, and handed her over to Brand. 1 month later, the reputation of the night attack became louder and louder. At the same time, the Imperial Court also received the report of Estetha's battle to pacify the northern aliens and kill 400,000 people. Some ministers who were afraid of death immediately suggested to the young emperor to send Estetha return to the imperial capital to eliminate the night attack organization. After receiving the order, Estetha quickly rushed towards the imperial capital with the 3 beast warriors. The night attack organization hiding in the suburbs soon received the news of Estetha's return. Najexitan, who was sitting at the head of the table, subconsciously touched it. Touching his eyes, Estetha's power, which could be called a demon, came to his mind. At the same time, Liane, who was sitting below, clenched his right hand and was hesitant to tell Yihu what happened. Ma Yin, who was sitting opposite, had his eyes flashing slightly. At night, Liane took advantage of everyone's sleep to get up and face Yihu. He ran to the hotel where he was. With the blessing of the Taigu Beast King, Liane was confident that he could run back and forth within an hour. Everyone knows that Estetha is back. What's the use of telling me now? Yihu looked at the figure in front of him speechlessly. At this moment, a figure came out of the shadows and said in a bad tone, "It turns out that you are a traitor. So you also revealed the retreat route of Hill and me." Ma Yin held the romantic turret and pointed at Liane and roared, "Why? Why do you want to betray us?" A beam of light shot straight at Liane's chest. Yihu flashed in front of Liane and fired 2 heat rays from his eyes to interrupt Ma Yin's attack. He said coldly, "Stupid woman is really hopeless." As soon as he finished speaking, he came behind Ma Yin and knocked her out. Yihu looked at Liane who looked worried and whispered, "Take her back, we will be clear from now on." After watching the 2 people leave, Yihu looked back at the tall palace with a trace of heat in his eyes. He was sure that even Jesus would not be able to keep the Ice Queen. A week later, Estetha returned to the palace and distributed the 10,000 taels of gold rewarded by the young emperor to the soldiers who stayed in the north. He also proposed his idea of falling in love. The young emperor and the ministers were stunned at the same time. Returning to the general's mansion, Asteth ordered the 3 beast warriors to hunt down the minister of the good camp and put the blame on the night attack. After learning that the minister had been killed, Najexitan immediately sent Tashmi and others to protect the other 2 justice-minded ministers. At the same time, Yehu, who was walking on the street, suddenly saw a beautiful figure sitting on a wooden chair licking ice cream. Looking at the face that was the same as in his memory, Yehu raised the corners of his mouth slightly and walked towards the other party. Chapter 73 Return. Liane, who was responsible for monitoring Asteth, lay on the eaves and stared at the figure below, her back covered with sweat. With the enhanced transformation into the king of beasts, she sensed Asteth's power through the instinct of the beast, and she felt that she would die if she took action. Only then did she understand why the boss was afraid of someone. Just as she was about to retreat, a familiar figure came to Asteth. Come with me. I will take you to another world, where there are endless prey. Yehu looked at the blue figure in front of him with a smile. Asteth stopped licking the ice cream and looked up at the ordinary-looking Yehu and said coldly, "Your aura is very powerful, you are a good prey. Looks like I still have to win over you." As soon as he finished speaking, Yehu used his mental power to wrap Asteth and slowly squeeze it inward. A bloodthirsty smile appeared on Asteth's face. Endless cold air surged from his body, isolating Yehu's mental power 1 meter away from him. Upon seeing this, the surrounding crowd immediately turned and ran away from the 2 men. Asteth's eyes turned cold and she used her power to form a long sword and stab it at Yehu's heart. Suddenly, 2 heat rays shot straight towards her face. Just when Yehu thought she was sure to win, an ice wall appeared out of thin air. The 2 of them resisted Yehu's heat ray, and a mist filled the surroundings. Although the ice wall only blocked it for a moment. But this time was enough for Asteth to come behind Yehu. Seeing the other party's silvery skin surrounding Asteth, the well-informed Asteth was a little confused. She had never heard of that emperor. Tools can make people's skin look like this. Hateful! Yehu roared angrily, activating the energy of the space gem in his body to knock Asteth back, and then let the energy surround him. He originally thought that his mental power would be enough to survive in this world, but Asteth's sword just now was so fierce. He hit him in the face. If his mental power hadn't weakened the opponent's strength, or if he hadn't been able to temper it, he would have been cold by now. Although there is infinite energy in the body, Yehu can only release and gather it and has no other leisurely control methods. Yehu's combat experience and consciousness are far inferior to Asteth. If the energy shield was not hard enough, he would have been cold. Seeing that Asteth could not win for a long time, a cold light flashed in his eyes and he snorted. Mokabotmo. As soon as he finished speaking, the scene around him instantly froze. Asteth held an ice sword and walked elegantly to 1 meter in front of Yehu. His face showed the joy of a successful hunt. He held up the ice sword and stabbed Yehu's heart fiercely, ready to wait for the opponent. After her death, she made a specimen and placed it in her collection room. This was the strongest enemy she had ever encountered. The smile on Asteth's face disappeared in the next second. And the sharp ice sword stopped half a meter away from Yehu's heart. No matter how hard she tried, she could not break through the invisible shield. 5 seconds later, the surrounding scene recovered. A trace of fatigue flashed across Asteth's normal face. This move was not a small burden on her. Yehu pressed down on her frantically beating heart and whispered. "Can you leave with me now?" "Interesting." A sneer appeared at the corner of Asteth's mouth. She subconsciously put her hand in her arms and took out an iron ring, intending to put it on Yehu's neck. However, when he was half a meter away from the opponent, he was blocked by the invisible shield. Looking at Yehu's cold eyes, Asteth calmly retracted the iron ring, a flash of regret flashed in his eyes, and whispered, "Why should I believe what you say? Give up everything I have and go with you." When Yehu heard this, he put away the indifference on his face and said calmly, "The life you are living now is not what you want, isn't it? You have hunted almost all the powerful prey around you. I can take you to other worlds to hunt powerful people. My ability is the proof." Asteth's eyes flashed slightly and he was silent for a while before nodding. Just when Yehu was secretly happy, he heard the other party continue to say, "I can't leave with you until I wipe out the night attack. I never give up on my mission." Looking at the determination in the other person's eyes, Yehu nodded. Anyway, he had to wait for the plot character to die before leaving this world. Liane, who was on top of the house opposite, suppressed the fear in his heart after hearing the conversation between the two and left quickly, preparing to tell the matter. "Tell boss. Do I need to stop her?" After hearing this, Esteth shook her head and walked towards her mansion with graceful steps. She said in a cold voice, "No. I've had all the fun today." When she learned that there was a new prey in the new world, Esteth, she felt endless fighting spirit and fell in love again, but she forgot about it. At the same time, Brand, who was responsible for protecting the minister of the good camp, met his former boss, General Leva. The three beast warriors led by him, after a big battle, Brand switched to the limit of 1 for 2, and handed the Taigu demon haunting to Tajmi so that the other party could fight the last one. After a fight, Tajmi successfully killed Nu, who was strengthened by the sound of the flute. Standing next to Brand's body, he looked at the other man's face with a smile on his face as he died. Tears quietly ran down his cheeks. He was confused after the death of his two childhood sweethearts. However, the people who attacked him at night once again gave him the warmth of home. The departure of Hill and Brand made him understand that he was too weak to protect everything. Feeling the power given to him by the evil ghost, Tajmi's eyes flashed with determination, and he wanted to use this power to protect everything he cherished. Najexitan showed a look of defeat on her face when she learned that a strong man no less than Esteth had joined the Empire's camp. However, this defeat was soon defeated by the faith in her heart. She watched Tajmi carry it back. There was a trace of sadness in everyone's eyes. Although Brand was gay, he was a reliable partner in the battle. The next day, Najehitan said goodbye to everyone and went to the headquarters to find reinforcements. A month later, Najehitan took the Taigus Susanoo and Chelsea, who was good at changing appearance, back to Night Raid and decided to form a team with Esteth. The hunters organize a fight to the death. The two groups fought openly and secretly in the imperial capital and each lost several Taigu envoys. In the end, Tajmi was caught by Minister Wunist and prepared for public execution. Everyone who learned the news came to the execution ground to rescue Tajmi. Mayan and General Buid, who were holding romantic forts, died together. Susanoo was killed by Esteth after leaving behind. The resistance army gathered 1,000,000 troops and came to the imperial capital. Minister Wunist proposed that the young emperor use the Taigu supreme throne. After suppressing the rebellion, Yehu, who was standing on the roof, looked at the beaten Tajmi who had released her transformation and once again shouted "Evil Ghost!" He penetrated the supreme throne with firm belief and dragged the seriously injured one to hold up the hill-like supreme throne before dying of exhaustion. Esteth, who was suppressing the rebels outside the city, looked at the fallen supreme throne and was about to use the secret skill Islan. When the general killed millions of coalition troops, Yehu landed next to her and whispered, "There is no need to cause such meaningless killings. Sign it and follow me to other worlds." After hesitating for a second, Esteth pressed his fingerprint on the contract. Chi Tong rushed out of the distant woods and aimed directly at the two of them. 2 hours later, Yehu and Esteth stood in an alley following him. As Liane took his last breath, the progress bar finally reached 100%, and the surrounding scene began to distort and deform. The two returned to the living room of the villa. Chapter 74 Troublesome Character. Is this the new world? Esteth strolled in the living room and looked around. Yehu came to the other party and began to explain the use of various items, and gave Esteth the right to use Alyssa. Looking at the unruly look in the other party's eyes, Yehu sighed slightly in his heart. The function of the contract is only to amplify the importance of the contractor in the mind of the contractee, thereby indirectly affecting the other party's thinking. Stern, Ivan, and Godzilla were all saved by Yehu. Only with the amplification of the contract function can they be able to obey their words. But in Esteth's heart, Yehu is just her confidant. If she is in a good mood, she will listen to the other party's suggestions. If she is in a bad mood, it doesn't matter who you are. Unless Yehu can crush Esteth in all aspects, his status in her heart will never be. They can only be subordinates. It is the truth that Esteth believes in, that the strong dominate the weak. Is this the reward order in this world? Esteth pointed at the video introductions of various superheroes and supervillains projected by Alyssa with a bloodthirsty smile on her lips. She looked up and down as if she was picking prey. The next moment Esteth focused on the Green Goblin. He turned his head towards Yehu and said, "Prepare a torture room and collection room for me." Yehu, who had seen Esteth's attitude towards Tajmi in the anime, twitched his lips and decided to put the plan to find the power gem on the agenda. The Ice Queen, who had not been brainwashed by love, exuded a cold aura. The two passed through the space door and came to the undersea laboratory. Ivan and Stern, who were doing research, immediately stopped what they were doing and stood on the left side of the space door. They bowed respectfully to Yihu and shouted in a deep voice. "Boss!" Yihu nodded and the depression in his heart was swept away. He looked at the experimental equipment around him. Esteth frowned and said with some dissatisfaction, "Where is the room I want?" "Okay, okay. I'll build it for you right away." Yihu shrugged and took the other person to the second underground floor and shouted loudly, "The decision is yours, handsome boy from Skull Island." As soon as he finished speaking, King Kong appeared in the open space holding a giant axe. His face suddenly fell down when he saw all the familiar things around him. He glanced at Yihu dissatisfied. Just as he was about to lose his temper, his legs were frozen by a cold air. King Kong struggled a few times. There was a look of horror in his eyes. "Your pet is not very obedient. Do you want me to help you make it a specimen?" Esteth licked her lips with murderous intent flashing in her eyes. This was the first time she had seen such a tall orangutan. His head was very suitable for placement in the bedroom. Upon seeing this, Yihu quickly held down Esteth's sword-holding hand. He whispered, "This is the craftsman who built the torture chamber and collection room for you." Esteth stared at Yihu's hand, frowned and said coldly, "Let go of your hand." Only then did Yihu realize that he had held the other person's hand and felt the cold, silky touch, and a ripple appeared in his heart. However, the ripple was soon shaken away by Esteth's piercing murderous intent, and Yihu laughed twice. Letting go of his hand, King Kong stopped his axe and entered the contract space an hour later with a resentful look on his face. Stern commanded the assistant robot to decorate the room with his eyes. Esteth nodded with satisfaction and began to plan the first collection in his heart. After returning to the villa, Yihu asked the other party to choose a room on the second floor. Early the next morning, Yihu came to the living room as usual, and there was something on the TV. Reporting on the Green Goblin attack, the corners of his mouth twitched slightly as he looked at the familiar blue-haired figure in the picture. Damn! How could there be such a monster? Norman stepped on the aircraft and moved sideways in the air to avoid the ice pick's shot from below. Esteth quickly moved and jumped on the roof of the building. There was a feeling of chasing prey in his heart. Norman glanced at the sea in the distance and immediately changed direction. "Ha ha ha! Come here!" Norman flew on the sea and shook his body towards the figure standing on the shore. Esteth squatted down and pressed his left hand hard on the sea surface. A cold breath directly froze the sea surface. Norman, who was dancing, turned around and ran away without saying a word. Looking at the figure flying higher and higher, Esteth narrowed his eyes and missed his super dangerous mount. "The mutant in front of you, please put down your weapons and raise your hands, otherwise we will take coercive measures against you." More than a dozen police cars parked on the shore, and the police sergeant leading the team shouted loudly with a loudspeaker. Esteth, who was in a bad mood, pulled out his long sword and swung it in the direction of the sound. Only a 100-meter-long streak was seen. A long ice wall penetrated the ground on the shore together with the police car. After getting rid of the annoying flies, Esteth jumped to the shore and strolled leisurely. Seeing all this, Yihu felt numb. The other party's behavior would definitely lead to a strong backlash. Yihu just wanted to grow silently and did not want to be an enemy of the entire world, but the appearance of Esteth changed everything. In the SHIELD headquarters, Nick Fury frowned when he saw the destruction caused by Esteth in the video, and immediately ordered Natasha's team to stop it. After the three left, Nick Fury rubbed his brows and felt that the world had changed too much. Ghosts and ghosts from all walks of life keep appearing. "This lady, please put down the weapon in your hand." Esteth swallowed the piece of meat in her mouth, turned around, looked at Natasha and the three of them, and said in a cold tone, "Get out of my sight within 3 breaths or you will die." The cold air passed over the bodies of the three of them. Jessica narrowed her eyes. This was the first time she had encountered such a powerful female mutant. The aura alone made her tremble. After 3 breaths, Esteth was thrown away. A cold light flashed in the eyes of the meat skewer in his hand. "Wait a moment." A space door appeared among the crowd, and Yihu slowly walked out of it, but Esteth turned a deaf ear and passed over Yihu's head. He raised dozens of ice picks with his left hand and shot them straight at the three of them. Facing the incoming attack, the three of them used their own countermeasures. Natasha rolled several times to avoid the ice pick attack. Hawkeye retreated while using a bow and arrow to intercept the ice pick. Jessica crossed her hands to protect her cheeks and let the ice pick hit her body. "I said, enough." Yehu stepped in front of the three of them and used an energy shield to block subsequent attacks. Asteth put his hand on the hilt of the sword and said coldly, "You want to defy my will? I want to try." Yehu raised his lips slightly and waved open a space door with a gesture of invitation. After crossing the space door, the two came to a desert. Asteth stamped his right foot and the cold air in his body froze the surrounding desert within 1 kilometer. Then he drew his long sword and stabbed Yehu on the right shoulder, preparing to teach this disobedient subordinate a lesson. Yehu stopped the space around the opponent with a wave of his right hand. Influenced by the plot of the movie, he thought that the space gem only had infinite energy and teleportation functions. Even the energy shield was extended by him based on infinite energy. He had never taken the initiative to study other uses before. It wasn't until he saw Asteth's Mokobot that Yehu had a different thought in his heart. "You lose." Yehu stretched out his fingers and gently touched Asteth's eyebrows and then released the space from stillness. Chapter 75. The expression on Asteth's face kept changing. Before she was defeated, even with the blessing of the contract function, it only made Yehu a confidant in her heart. But now Asteth puts herself in the perspective of a loser. "When I went to see Yehu, my eyes lost the coldness of the past and instead showed a girlish shyness." This posture was exactly the same as when he was conquered by Tajmi's sunny smile in the anime. Yehu looked at Asteth, who had awakened the love attribute, and felt relieved. At least he didn't have to worry about the other party causing trouble again in the future. "Let's go, it's time for us to go back." Asteth lowered her head and responded softly, then Yehu took the other person's arm and leaned slightly, placing his weight on Yehu. As soon as the two returned to the villa, they saw Nick Fury sitting on the sofa with a dark face. "Should you give me an explanation?" Hearing the blame in the other person's tone, Asteth took a step forward and said coldly, "The weak are not worthy of communicating with the strong." As soon as she finished speaking, several ice picks stabbed at the vital parts of Nick Fury's body. Asteth looked at the figure of a donkey rolling to avoid the attack and waved her left hand expressionlessly to condense more ice picks. The opponent's strength was not worthy of her use. "Sword. Okay." Yehu stepped forward and held down the other person's hand, looking at Nick Fury, who was as heavy as water, and said softly, "Let's leave this matter as it is. I promise she won't do anything at will in the future. Your abilities are too weird, and after merging with the cosmic cube, you can open space doors in various places. Why should I believe what you say?" When Yehu heard this, a cruel smile appeared on the corner of his mouth and said in a deep voice, "Carol can't defeat me. Asgard doesn't dare to fight me, is that enough?" Nick Fury's heart sank. He was a little surprised that the other party could name Carol. As for Asgard, he didn't expect too much. He simply checked the cards in his hand. Nick Fury stood up and snorted. "Remember what you said." After leaving the villa, Nick Fury got into the bulletproof car and looked deeply at the living room on the first floor of the villa. He started the car and headed towards the SHIELD headquarters. All the way, he was thinking about how to deal with Yehu. At the same time, Reed Richards brought Ben Grimm to the Victor building to prepare for the other party to invest in his cosmic energy research. After a conversation, Reed Richards gave up most of his interests and successfully obtained Victor's funds, investment and space station loan rights. 3 days later, everyone took a spaceship to the space station and set up equipment to study cosmic energy. Just when Reed Richards was immersed in the joy of research, Victor took Susan to the observation deck and opened the surrounding protective shields to reveal the glass outside wall. Susan was quickly attracted by the light blue planet under her feet. "Susan, we have been dating for 2 years, and today I am going to make a major decision." Victor took out his diamond ring and said affectionately, "I want to say 4 words to you, 4 words that can change our lives." There was a hint of tangle on Susan's face. Although Victor was very kind to her, Susan still couldn't forget Reed Richards in her heart. However, the current atmosphere and Victor's affectionate offensive were gradually disintegrating her inner defenses. When Susan was about to say yes, Reed Richards came to the top of the viewing platform and said in a deep voice, "Things have changed. The cosmic energy is 7 hours faster than expected, and we only have 6 minutes left." Victor suppressed the anger in his heart and said in a deep voice, "Then let them enter the viewing platform. Didn't you say that the protective shield here can protect us?" Upon hearing this, Reed Richards immediately contacted Ben Grimm outside the space station and asked him to jump back to the space station. Susan in the observation deck looked at Victor's movements and said in a deep voice, "You want to lock them out? This way you can at least hug me." Victor looked at Susan solemnly, but the latter ignored his efforts to stay and walked out of the observation deck alone. Looking at the gradually closing protective shield, a flash of light flashed across Victor's face. After a moment of hesitation, he opened the protective cover and prepared to pull Susan back. At this moment, the cosmic energy crashed into the space station, and everyone was exposed and let out painful wails. The incident was soon reported on the news. Yehu, who was frying eggs in the kitchen, heard the name Reed Richards and immediately thought of Mr. Fantastic and the Fantastic Four. He was shocked when he thought about the Galactus who appeared in the second film. But the strength of the five gods in Marvel is far from being something he can resist. Even the Silver Surfer who is on a skateboard is not something he can deal with. Thinking of this, Yehu quickly came to his death and opened the space door. The two came to the undersea laboratory. Yehu informed the three of them of the seriousness of the matter and put them into the contract space. After returning to the villa, Yehu took out his mobile phone and called Jessica's phone. "What's wrong, boss? Where are you? Come back quickly. The Earth will soon face a disaster." Jessica glanced at Nick Fury on the main seat and said softly after seeing the other nodding, "Boss, can you explain it carefully? Come back quickly." After finishing speaking, Yehu hung up the phone and went to the living room, put Dabai in his backpack, and then lay on the sofa thinking about the feasibility of escaping into God's domain. "Bring this with you, we must understand the disaster the other party is talking about." Nick Fury handed Jessica a miniature headset and watched her leave. He looked around and said slowly, "The main purpose of calling everyone together this time is to prevent Yehu from going on a rampage and destroying the world." "Impossible. I believe he would not do such a thing." Thor slammed the table and shouted loudly. Jane Foster, who was standing beside her, put her hand on her forehead and pulled her boyfriend's arm hard. Stark shrugged and said softly, "I agree with his point of view. Yehu has never shown strong aggressiveness." Nick Fury looked at everyone with an unchanged expression and waited for the others' opinions. Natasha stood up holding the conference table and said in a calm tone, "The Lord of God's domain once said that the other party has integrated the cosmic cube. You can be sure that he will not go berserk. If the energy in his body leaks out, it will be a disaster for the world. Then what do you want?" Banner sat at the end and said calmly, "Lock him up. Is there any way in God's domain to suppress the energy in his body?" Nick Fury stared at Thor with his only remaining eye, as if he wanted to see through him. Thor shook his head and said softly, "I advise you not to do this. Yehu's body, his energy is no worse than that of my father. And you cannot bear the consequences of offending the other party." Nick Fury curled his lips in disdain when he heard this. He was caught off guard by Yehu and broke through his psychological defense with words. When he returned to the headquarters, he realized that Yehu would not have spoken out if he was not afraid of Carol and Asgard. "You should act more arrogant. Nick Fury is going to use a pager to call Carol back to gather all his strength to defeat or kill Yehu. He will not allow uncontrolled forces to appear on the earth." Chapter 76 First Hearing. When I got back to the villa, I saw Yehu sitting on the sofa with a serious face. Jessica stroked her hair beside her ear and said softly, "Boss, why are you calling me back in such a hurry? You should have heard about the space station accident." Yehu sighed and said helplessly, "I received the news that Galactus will come to the Earth soon, and you will stay in your room these days and then I will take you to Aspen. Gad and see if we can avoid this disaster." Everyone in the meeting room shifted their gazes to Tuo. Only the other party here knew the alien information, looked at the inquiring eyes of the crowd, and Thor recalled it softly, "I don't have any information about this in my memory." Nick Fury narrowed his eyes and decided to visit Yehu to understand the situation. At the same time, Jessica's questioning voice came from the conference room. "Boss, how do you know that the Earth cannot resist the opponent? Let's take the Avengers, Asgard, X-Men and many other non-governmental organizations." Listening to Jessica's question, everyone's minds immediately became active. Yehu smiled disdainfully and whispered, "Total of what you said." Yehu was just about to say that the other party could not add up, but when he thought of Phoenix Girl and Scarlet Witch, he immediately changed his mind and said, "Maybe, but I don't want to participate in a gamble with little chance of winning." Then Jessica's distraught voice and the sound of closing the door came from the headset. After Yehu's footsteps disappeared, Jessica asked in a low voice what Nick Fury would do next. She couldn't do it by giving up the people on Earth and escaping alone. "You stay in the room first, and I will go to Yehu to ask about the specific situation." Nick Fury asked Jessica to cut off the communication and glanced around, then said softly, "What do you guys think? Everything is his guess. We don't need to be so nervous. Natasha stood up and wanted to liven up the atmosphere, but no one could laugh at the moment. After a few seconds of silence, Nick Fury stood up and said slowly, "That's it. The meeting is over." Leaving the headquarters of SHIELD, Stark called Thor and Steve to sit on the top floor of the Stark building with serious expressions on their faces. They understood that Yehu was not the kind of person who would make jokes. Stark decided to wait. Nick Fury will decide how to act after the news is sent back. "Sir, someone is visiting outside the door." A mechanical voice sounded in the living room. Elisa's body had already been put into Yehu's backpack, and all that was left was a subroutine. The moment Yehu opened the door and saw Nick Fury, his face darkened and he closed the door forcefully. "Wait. Let's talk again." Nick Fury endured the pain in his feet and whispered, "What was the Galactus you were talking about before? Are you spying on me?" Yehu frowned, a little annoyed at the other party's tricks. Nick Fury didn't deny it, but just looked at Yehu calmly, wanting to know the answer to the question. "The universe is bigger than you can imagine. Galactus is one of the 5 strongest people on the surface. If you really want to stop the other party, you can find the 2 ladies who fought in the street last time. Their final form has a force that rivals it." After Yehu finished speaking, he used his mental power to push Nick Fury out. He had already told the other party whether he could succeed or not. It was none of his business. Sooner or later, he would destroy the Marvel Universe with less Earth. 50%, after all, most of the famous people are from this planet. After Nick Fury got into the car, he informed everyone of the news he had received and mobilized his forces to find Jean Grey and Wanda. Stark brought Bosie to the lobby of Yehu's villa, and looked at the 2 clinging to each other. He said, "If you want to show your affection, go home and show it off. I want to ask you for a favor." Stark looked at the figure standing behind the door seriously and said in a low voice, "Nick Fury wants to use the Avengers to check and balance you. I need you to help me protect Potts." Yehu's eyes flickered slightly, and he gave up his position and said in a flat tone, "I can't guarantee that Asgard is absolutely safe, but I can guarantee that I will take care of Potts as much as possible. This time, the opponent is too strong. I am not fully sure." "Your words are enough." Stark nodded and opened his mask and hugged Potts. After the other party left, Yehu arranged Potts to Jessica's room and prepared to take the 2 of them to escape the Earth. At the same time, Odin woke up from a deep sleep and felt the trauma in his body. He shook his head helplessly. Odin, who was about to relax, subconsciously came to the treasure house and looked at the dazzling array of treasures inside. A sense of pride surged in his heart. Each of the captured artifacts represented a meritorious service. Until he came to the place where the eternal flame was placed, his eyes became extremely sharp as he looked at the empty corner, and said in a deep voice, "Where are the guards?" "Dear King, what are your orders?" The guard made a fist with his right hand and put it on his heart, kneeling down on one knee with a very respectful expression. Odin calmed down the dissatisfaction in his heart and said in a deep voice, "Where is my eternal fire?" The guard glanced at the empty corner and reminisced, then whispered, "Didn't the king reward him to the adult who repaired the Rainbow Bridge?" Odin took a deep breath and waved his hand to the guard. He cursed Yehu in his heart for not being a human being and not even leaving him a fire. The 3 brothers were ordered to go to Muspelheim to steal the eternal fire in an attempt to weaken Surtur. The 2 brothers gave him their own energy in order to let him escape, and then they defeated Surtur and brought back the eternal fire. After taking a deep breath, Odin let go of his obsession. He was already vaguely aware of the falling sun, and did not want to provoke an enemy for Asgard who could open the door anywhere. With the Rainbow Bridge, he understood the terrifying power of this ability. At this moment, the guard reported Heimdall asking for an audience. "King! I'm glad you woke up in time." Heimdall clenched his right fist and placed it on his heart, bowed to Odin and then said in a deep voice, "His Majesty Thor asked me to ask you if you know about Galactus." "What?" A flash of horror flashed across Odin's face and he said with a heavy tone, "Don't tell me Thor has offended the other party." Seeing Odin losing his composure, Heimdall quickly reported the information sent back by Thor. After hearing this, Odin said with a serious expression on his face, "Bring him back and seal the divine realm." Thor, who was discussing things at S.H.I.E.L.D., was suddenly picked up by a colorful beam of light falling from the sky. Nick Fury's face sank. The arrival of the Rainbow Bridge showed that Asgard did not want to participate in this war. "Father! You're awake!" Thor came to Odin and said in an excited tone, "Great, this time let us, father and son, work together to crush that planet." Odin used his divine power to seal Thor's mouth and said sternly, "Shut up. That kind of person will be sensed as long as you chant his name." Chapter 77 Mutation. The 4 people who were being nursed back to health in Victor's medical institution slowly woke up and felt lucky to have escaped death. Just when everyone thought everything was over, their bodies gradually mutated. Unable to bear the thought of turning into stone, Ben ran into a wall and ran away. He left the private hospital and went to the city to look for his girlfriend. But the other party was extremely frightened by the stone-like Ben. The shocked Ben took advantage of the darkness and came to the bridge. The cold wind at night blew on his hard skin without any chill, but his heart was extremely cold. In the early morning of the next morning, a man whose investment failed took his last sip of wine and stepped onto the bridge to commit suicide. Ben on the side saw this and said quickly, "Hey! Nothing is insurmountable, man." Ben's appearance made the man's heart beat wildly, thinking he had encountered a monster. He was so frightened that he backed away and ended up hanging on the bridge. A truck quickly stepped on the brakes and a large car accident occurred. Hearing the wailing of people on the bridge, Ben jumped subconsciously. He walked down the bridge to a truck and rescued the driver from the cab. But the police who arrived pointed their guns at him. Suddenly there was an explosion in the distance. Johnny jumped down and protected a little girl under him. Susan subconsciously raised her hands in front of her to resist the spread of an invisible energy. The flames eventually dissipated it into nothingness. The ambulance that came to support had half of its car body knocked off the bridge in order to avoid the explosion. Upon seeing this, Ben rushed forward and held the front of the car tightly, letting out a dull roar. He also pulled the fire truck back little by little, and 10 policemen raised their hands. He pointed the M15 pistol at Ben and growled, "Hold your head with your hands and squat on the ground." The fire chief slowly got out of the car and held down the leading police officer's hand and shook his head. Listening to the warm applause of the crowd around him, the leading police officer immediately understood what his colleague meant and winked at his subordinates. If he gave the order at this time, if he catches him, his career will be over. The newspapers the next day would definitely scold him bloody. Ben, who was enjoying the cheers, suddenly saw the familiar figure of his girlfriend in the crowd. When he got closer, he found an engagement ring on the ground. Ben tried to use his thick fingers picked up the ring but failed. Reed Richards gently patted Ben's hard body to pick up the ring for his friend. Due to the failure of investing in Reed to study cosmic energy, Victor's company stock began to plummet, and the investors decided to withdraw their capital a week later. Victor, who was facing bankruptcy, unexpectedly discovered that he could absorb electricity. He remembered that Reed Richards once said that he could bathe the universe. The theory that energy can enhance abilities aroused a desire for power in my heart. Yehu's eyes narrowed as he watched the live news broadcast at home. He vaguely remembered that not long after defeating Dr. Doom in the first movie, the Silver Surfer came to Earth to guide Galactus and returned to Reed Richard in the Bicoast building. He began to study the reasons for the mutation of the 4 people and decided to find a way to restore Ben to his original state. Ben, who went out to get drunk, met a blind girl who didn't care about his appearance and comforted him. Ben, who felt love again, hated his current appearance. When he returned to the building and looked at the equipment built in front of him, Ben wanted to try it regardless of the danger. But Reed Richards did not want his friend to risk his life. After some persuasion to no avail, the two got into a dispute and eventually broke up. Victor in the building opposite used surveillance equipment to keep an eye on Reed Richards' movements. After Ben left, he saw Reed Richards stepping into the experimental equipment to conduct experiments in person and pointing out the omissions in the process. A smile appeared on Victor's lips and he waited for Susan to lead him. When Reed Richards went to the doctor, he came to the Bicoast building and asked his assistant to call Ben over. "Where's Reed?" Ben narrowed his eyes and looked at Victor in the shadows with vigilance. He always felt that the other person was not a good person. Victor took a step forward, revealed half of his face and said in a calm tone, "The instrument has been made, but a stable one is needed. Energy. Do you have that kind of thing?" Ben's eyes lit up with a sense of darkness, and Victor spread his hands and said softly, "Now you just need to tell me if you are willing to change back to your original appearance." Ben entered the instrument with firm steps. Just when the power was about to run out, Victor opened the closed window at the top of the instrument and began to absorb the raging cosmic energy and release his stored power inside. After a minute, Ben returned to his original state and walked out of the instrument. Came out with a smile on his face. Victor, who once again absorbed the energy of the universe, had a bright smile on his face. He slapped Ben away and then took Reed, who came to check the situation, back to his experimental building. He used a freezing device to freeze the other person's body, and then took out the thermal energy on the side. Tracker rocket fires a rocket towards the B-cost building. After waking up, Ben looked at Johnny's back as he deflected the rocket and whispered to Susan beside him, "Let's go rescue Reed together." "No, Ben, your current physical condition is not suitable for fighting." Susan shook her head and refused Ben's request. The three of them have been friends for many years. At this moment, instinct returned to the original state. Susan was also happy for the other party in her heart, but she could not put Ben in danger. After Susan left, Ben entered the experimental equipment again. Susan came to Victor's laboratory invisibly. After a fight, Ben retransformed and broke through the wall. He hugged Victor and jumped down from the top floor and crashed into a small car. In the truck, Victor, whose body was made of metal, was not afraid of Ben's hand-to-hand combat. The two of them hit each other's hard bodies back and forth on the street. In the end, Victor, who had the energy to release the impact, was slightly better. Just when Victor was about to learn about Ben's life, Reed Richards took Susan and Johnny to fight against Victor. Reed used his body to block the opponent's sight, and Johnny ran around Victor to release the high temperature. Susan used an invisible force field to cover the two of them to increase the internal temperature, and finally Ben used a fire hose on the street to cool down the other person. Seeing Victor transformed into a sculpture, the four of them looked at each other and smiled, feeling like a family. This war did not attract the attention of the major forces. Victor's assistant successfully retrieved the sculpture from the four Reeds. It was loaded onto a freighter and shipped to Victor's hometown of Latvia. After the war, Reed recognized his inner thoughts and proposed to Susan. Ben also chased the blind girl, but Johnny was still living and drinking. Looking at the figure on the TV that looked exactly like Steve when he was young, Yehu's lips turned up slightly and he began to wonder how Steve felt when he saw his young self hugging him on TV. At the same time, in the boxing gym somewhere under S.H.I.E.L.D., Steve pressed the power button hard, got up and went to the sandbags to do something. Although he hated Johnny's behavior on TV, the attitude of his whole body being on fire was indeed very handsome. If given the choice, Steve would also like that ability. Nick Fury, who was sitting in the SHIELD office, took out a communicator and pressed it after hesitating repeatedly. Carol was performing an act of justice in a certain universe. Suspended in the universe, looking at the red light flashing on his wrist, he narrowed his eyes and headed in the direction of the Earth. Chapter 78 Silver Surfer. Yehu squatted at home and waited for the Silver Surfer to appear. He remembered that he came to Earth before Reed and Susan got married, but after waiting for a month, there was no news of the wedding between the two. During this period, Jessica repeatedly arguing with Yehu felt that waiting was a waste of life. Looking at the figure slamming out of the door, Yehu gently leaned on the sofa and sighed helplessly. At the same time, a bright silver light and shadow in the universe was flying at an extremely fast speed. The Stark Group's satellite had been observing the conditions of the universe. 4 months later, after Reed and Susan received news of their fifth marriage, satellites captured images of the Silver Surfer entering the Earth. Stark immediately called Yehu to inquire about the results. That should be Galactus' subordinate Silver Surfer. After hanging up the phone, Yehu breathed a sigh of relief. He had been extremely anxious when waiting for the other party, but after getting the exact news, he regained his composure. After entering the Earth, the Silver Surfer slowed down and used his abilities to create bottomless pits in various places, accelerating the pace of the planet's demise. This aura of desolation will guide Galactus to feed. The news began to report on the strange phenomena occurring in various places. Looking at the lakes that were inexplicably frozen, and the pyramids covered with snow, Yehu narrowed his eyes. After receiving a positive answer, Stark summoned the members of the Avengers to rush towards the next pothole that was researched. The senior management who did not think so before changed their attitude after seeing the destructive power of the Silver Surfer and fully supported everyone's actions. 3 hours later, Silver Surfer stood on his skateboard and stared at the people on the cliff with cold eyes. After being transformed by Galactus, he only had the belief in finding edible planets for him. "We're here. Don't even think about destroying the Earth. Get that Galactus and get out of here." Steve stood at the front with his shield in hand, staring sharply at the silver figure in the air. The next second, an energy beam hit the shield hard and knocked him away dozens of meters. Standing up, Steve felt something in his left hand. This is the first time he has encountered a shield in a situation where it cannot fully absorb energy. "You are just doing unnecessary struggle. The Silver Surfer's body bent slightly and he accelerated towards the crowd. Stark took a step forward and raised his hand to launch energy blasts, but the Silver Surfer took them all away. The moment the two of them crossed paths, the energy reactor on Stark's chest was instantly extinguished. Everyone just wanted to get close when they were frozen by a gust of cold air. Only Hulk broke through the blockade and came to the silver figure. He slapped the opponent's head hard with his palms, but was easily blocked by a pair of silver arms. The cold air spread along the arms and spread to Hulk's body. After finishing everyone, the Silver Surfer turned around and continued looking for nodes. The failure of the Avengers made the top management's hearts sink. Then they disseminated the images of this time and prepared to find the strong people hidden in the earth to jointly resist this crisis. People who watched the news were moved and disdainful, but most of the people were worried. Looking at the contact number scrolling at the bottom of the screen, Yehu turned off the TV and picked up the landline phone beside him to dial Jessica's number. "Come back, let's go to Asgard." Jessica rubbed her stiff arms from the cold, looked at the Avengers sitting around and whispered, "Is there no way for the boss to stop him? He is not scary, but the existence behind him is not something we can mess with." Just as Yehu was about to continue to persuade Jessica, more than a dozen orange halos of light appeared in the villa, and then familiar figures walked out of it. Yehu hung up. The phone in his hand whispered to the figure beside him. "Meet the Ancient One again." Guyi, who was wearing an orange monk's robe, took off the hood on his head to reveal his shiny bald head and said in a calm voice, "Is there any way you can avoid this disaster? Aren't you always committed to maintaining balance?" Yehu calmly looked at Guyi and said indifferently, "You should know that Swallowing Star, one of the 5 gods, is not something we can resist." Speaking of this, Yehu paused and looked sideways at Wanda and Jean Grey, shrugged and said in a frivolous tone, "If these two can grow to the top, 2 against 1 can still beat Galactus away." Hearing Yehu's words, everyone turned their attention to the two of them. Guyi looked deeply at Yehu and said in a calm tone, "Swallowing stars will destroy the entire Earth, so you haven't thought of doing anything. All I can do is take the people I know well and leave here." Yehu shook his head and said solemnly, "With the Eye of Agamotto, you can also leave here with Kamatage." Ancient One shook his head and said in a sincere tone, "Kamatage has always been committed to protecting the Earth. I will not let anyone destroy this planet. We can hope to negotiate with Galactus by using all our strength to activate the power of the 2 Infinity Stones." Yehu rolled his eyes and looked sideways at Jessica at the edge and said softly, "Come with me." Looking at everyone's gazes, Jessica shook her head. A look of disappointment flashed in Yehu's eyes and he opened a space door in front of him. When Guyi saw this, he immediately used the Eye of Agamotto to freeze time and came to Yehu. She pressed a palm on the opponent's chest in front of her, but the imaginary soul-leaving body did not appear. She felt that there were layers of invisible space between the palm and Yehu. During the fight between the two, only Jean Grey and Wanda saw that the others were immobilized by the power of the 2 gems. After several attempts, Guyi gave up and unblocked Yehu's time freeze. He sighed, opened a door with magic and left the villa. Yehu looked at Potts who was hugging Stark. The latter shook his head slightly and hugged Stark hard, as if he would never leave. Yehu sighed and stepped into the space gate to the Asgard square. Thor, holding the Meow Hammer, stood in the distance and waved with a smile on his face. "I may have to disturb you for a while." Yehu forced a smile on his face and shook Thor's hand. After moving into the palace arranged for him, he opened the system panel and prepared to go to other worlds to win points, and then go to Xandar to wait for Ronan to deliver the goods. After a search, he silently confirmed that there was a ripple in the surrounding space. The next second, Yehu's figure appeared in an ancient city. He looked at the people passing by and sighed at the power of the world's functions. Even with the space gem fused, he didn't notice anything wrong. Yehu stood at the port and looked at the foursome in the distance with a smile on his face. Evelyn was carrying a box and complaining about O'Connor to her brother on the side. At this moment, a figure thought from behind. "Are you waiting for me?" Looking back, she saw a handsome man smiling at the two of them. Evelyn's heartbeat suddenly accelerated, and the scene of being forcibly kissed before unconsciously flashed through her mind and she whispered, "Hello, hello." Yehu glanced at the 3 of them and turned around to walk into the cabin. Now was not the best time. He still needed the other party to take him to Hamunita to find Immortan. As long as he completed the trilogy, he would have enough points to exchange for a fusion card. Absorb an Infinity Stone again. Chapter 79 City of the Dead. The library director reported Evelyn's information to the Pharaoh's guard. After some discussion, the guard captain decided to prevent Evelyn and others from approaching Hamna Tower to avoid disturbing the pharaoh's sleep. The guard members came to stop everyone. Repelled by the cowboys and O'Connor on the boat, both sides suffered losses. Benny, who was leading the way for the cowboys, landed on the wrong shore in desperation. O'Connor brought the three of them to the market and used all their money to buy camels and water. Yehu didn't prepare these things anyway. It was just a thought for him to go back and forth. 3 days later, everyone crossed the desert at the dawn of the sun. They saw the hidden Hamna Tower, and at the same time, Benny also brought the cowboy nearby. The two groups scrambled towards the Hamna Tower. Due to the number of people, O'Connor and the others could only dig underground, while the professor took the cowboy to open the pharaoh's tomb to get the funerary objects and the Black Book of the Dead inside. In an instant, Yehu's eyes flashed slightly, and when night fell, he slowly came to the professor's side and put the black scripture of the undead in his arms into his backpack. 5 minutes later, Evelyn quietly came to the professor's side to look carefully for the whereabouts of the Black Book of the Dead. As a historian, she couldn't resist the temptation of this ancient book, and felt like a cat scratching her heart. 3 minutes later, the professor opened his eyes and looked at him. Evelyn said in a daze, "What are you doing?" Then, feeling empty in his hands, he looked down and saw that the Black Book of the Dead in his arms was gone. The professor frowned and said in a bad tone, "Girl, return the Black Book of the Dead to me. I didn't take the scriptures." Evelyn felt that the old man in front of her was blackmailing her. Their quarrel attracted the cowboys who were watching the night. Seeing this, the professor quickly shouted, "Catch her! Take the scriptures back!" Seeing this, O'Connor, who was hiding in the dark, pulled out 2 revolvers, rushed to Evelyn, pointed his gun at the cowboy opposite, and shouted in a low voice, "Go back! Otherwise, don't blame me for shooting." Yehu interfered with the cowboys with mental power and made them very irritable. As soon as O'Connor provoked them, he immediately pulled out his pistol and started shooting at each other. The moment the gunshot sounded, Evelyn was knocked down by O'Connor to the ground, but her fists were hard to bear. The 4 opponents, even O'Connor, who was an elite on the battlefield, were eventually shot to death due to the opponent's numerical advantage. The red-eyed cowboy rushed into the camp of Evelyn and the others and killed the 2 left behind, Jonathan and the warden. Looking at the 80% value on the progress bar, Yehu came to Benny and killed him with a heat ray. However, the bar did not increase. After thinking for a while, he went to Immortan's coffin and smashed the opponent's bones into ashes. The progress bar did not change at all. Just when Yehu was wondering, the third part of the Terracotta Warriors flashed in his mind, and he suddenly had a guess in his mind, but he had to wait decades to participate in the plot. With his girlfriend who is more than 1,000 years old, Yehu opened the space door and returned to the ancient city where O'Connor was previously imprisoned. He randomly found a ship and left the ancient desert city to the eastern country. Use mental power to control the warlords to find the Dragon Emperor's tomb and the Fountain of Youth for him. 3 years later, Yehu got the news of the Dragon Emperor's tomb. Looking at the men whose throats were cut at the excavation site, the figures of Ziwan's mother and daughter flashed in his mind and said in a low voice, "It seems we are not far from our goal. Let's continue digging." At night, Yehu was sitting alone in the tent, and suddenly there was a sound of footsteps coming from the door. Lin Lin held a dagger and said coldly, "You shouldn't be digging the tomb of the Dragon Emperor." 2 red lights flashed in Yehu's eyes. Lin Lin stopped and looked down at the only remaining sword hilt in her hand. She was taken aback for a moment, and then there was a sharp pain in her abdomen. The whole person was thrown out of the camp by Yehu's palm, and Lin Lin stared fiercely. Yan Yehu stood up and ran away into the distance, and the neighing of horses sounded in the silent night sky. Yehu raised his hand to stop his subordinates who were about to pursue and ordered them to continue digging the ancient tomb, then flew into the sky and hung far behind Lin Lin. A month later, the 2 arrived in Shangri-La. A beautiful woman stretched out her hand to support Lin Lin and said anxiously, "What's wrong, Lin Lin? Are you in trouble?" "Mother, mother, someone broke into the Dragon Emperor's tomb." As soon as the words fell, Ziwan passed out immediately, picked up her daughter and walked into a hidden cave, came to a spring water, just about to fill a bowl of water for her daughter to heal her wounds, when she heard a strange voice. "Finally I can leave this world." Ziwan looked at the red light passing through his body, and a trace of confusion flashed in his eyes. Yehu slowly came to the Fountain of Youth, dragged up the whole piece of land with his spiritual power, and put it in his backpack. Raise. A month later, Yehu returned to the camp. The warlord in charge of the excavation knelt down on one knee and said respectfully, "My lord, we have dug up the ancient tomb but there are too many traps inside." "Okay, I understand." Yihu waved his hand to stop the other person's words and walked to the gate of the ancient tomb in a hurry. Ignoring all the traps, he went straight to a carriage and looked at the driver above and whispered, "I'm sorry." As the broken progress bar of the pottery figurines finally reached 100%, the surrounding world began to become void. The next second Yihu returned to the palace in Asgard, and soon the respectful voices of the guards came from outside the door. "Sir, His Majesty Thor invites you to go to the main hall." "Got it." Yihu opened the door and motioned for the other party to lead the way. Thor, who was sitting on the throne, put away his serious expression when he saw Yihu come in. He grinned with big white teeth and said excitedly, "Yi, you are back. Father is too much. Why don't we work together to kill that swallowing star?" Yihu looked Thor up and down and wondered where he had the courage to rush to challenge Galactus. Frigga on the side rolled her eyes and felt that her son was really stupid. "Just give up, even if you defeat me, you can't prevent the final outcome." The Silver Surfer stood on the skateboard and glanced at the superheroes with cold eyes. Magneto frowned slightly and raised his right hand to manipulate the magnetic field around the opponent to isolate him from the skateboard. After research by a group of super geniuses, they discovered that the Silver Surfer's the energy comes from the skateboard under your feet. If you want to beat the opponent, you have to separate the two. The Silver Surfer waved his right hand and sent out a shock wave towards Magneto. Wanda jumped in front of her father and the chaos magic surged out of her body to defeat the light blue shock wave. The huge energy shock wave pushed the Silver Surfer back 20 meters. Then he stopped and looked at the woman with windless hair and said in a low voice, "How come you have chaos magic?" Just when the Silver Surfer was confused, Jean Grey appeared behind him and used all her strength to activate the Phoenix power in her body. The dark red Phoenix shock wave hit the Silver Surfer's back hard, and the light silver body dissipated at a speed visible to the naked eye. A second later, everyone looked at the Silver Surfer with only half of his body left, and a glimmer of hope surged in their hearts, but the next second a surge of energy surged from the skateboard to repair the opponent's body. "The Phoenix power, fortunately you haven't fully awakened yet." A flash of fear flashed in Silver Surfer's eyes. He did not expect that chaos magic and Phoenix power would appear on this ordinary planet at the same time. Chapter 80. Hulk roared and rushed towards the Silver Surfer, ready to regain the face he lost last time. Seeing this, the red tank quickly moved forward. A layer of light red energy shield emerged on the surface of its body and charged towards the Silver Surfer. Iceman and Fireman simultaneously after launching two long-range attacks, Johnny turned into a stream of fire and flew into the sky. Silver Surfer waved his hands and sent out shock waves to clear out a gap in the surrounding area. With a roar, Hulk grabbed the Colossus next to him and threw him out as a hidden weapon. Silver Surfer slapped Colossus on the face with his right hand. His cheek deformed and hit the ground beside him. Ganglushi endured the pain and supported his body with his hands half kneeling on the ground, spit out 5 metal-colored teeth in his mouth, and looked at the green figure who was knocked into the distance with a resentful face. If he couldn't beat the opponent, he must let him. Hulk tastes the feeling of finding teeth all over the ground. Iron Man stood at the end of the line and poured firepower at the silver figure in the center of the battlefield. The last battle made him understand that he could not fight hand-to-hand with the opponent or he would be drained of his energy. Steve jumped into the air and forcefully threw the shield is thrown. Silver Surfer casually caught the shield and swung it hard on the face of the Steel Warrior who was about to use Heidai Laoyu to sneak attack him. Several metallic teeth flew in the air. Ben, who was charging, subconsciously gritted his teeth and came to Silver Shadow Wolverine behind. Xia shook his head, secretly thinking that juniors are useless, and then jumped up and waved the adamantium alloy sharp claws in his hand to slash at Silver Surfer's waist. The sharp blade penetrated the opponent's body without hindrance. Cross and turn quickly to block the opponent's counterattack. Sitting in a wheelchair, Charles squinted his eyes. The huge mental power rushed towards Silver Surfer, wanting to pull the opponent into the mental space for a one-on-one fight. Seeing this, Tian Chi put his hand on the opponent's shoulder and sent the energy in his body to strengthen Charles's strength. Able. The two gritted their teeth, and the blue veins on their faces bulged. In the end, they failed to break through the other's mental protection. Except for the attacks of Qin Gilei and Wanda, Silver Surfer would selectively avoid the attacks of the others, and he directly ignored them. "You fucker, don't look down on me!" Cyclops roared and adjusted the power of his glasses to the maximum. The hot light energy ray hit the Silver Surfer's chest hard, dyeing the opponent's bright silver body red. Upon seeing this, Hawkeye drew 2 arrows and shot them into Silver Surfer's eyes. At the same time, a colorful beam of light fell on the battlefield, and Thor flew into the air with the Meow Hammer, causing the thunder in the sky to hit the silver figure on the ground. Ah! The Silver Surfer roared and released an energy shock wave towards the surroundings. Several melee tanks were knocked back dozens of meters away. The Silver Surfer stood on the skateboard and kept panting. His eyes swept over everyone and a sense of crisis arose in their hearts. At this moment, an orange halo appeared on his right side, and before the Silver Surfer could react, Ancient One put his hand on the Eye of Agamotto on his chest and used the power of the Time Stone to slow down the opponent's time. Seeing this, Reed Richards winked at Ben, who was standing aside. The latter nodded, hugged him and spun him around a few times before throwing him onto the Silver Surfer's skateboard. Reed held back the strong dizziness and hugged him hard. With the skateboard under his body, he secretly cursed Ben for being stupid. His look just now told him to rush up and seize the skateboard instead of telling him to throw himself out. Several power players stepped forward to hold Reed's lower body and began to pull. Charles and Apocalypse once again worked together to invade the Silver Surfer's mind. Susan wrapped Reed's body with mental power to prevent it from being torn apart by several big men. Qin-Ji-Lei and Wanda looked at each other and at the same time activated the energy in their bodies to hit the Silver Surfer. After a loud noise, a figure slowly fell to the ground. The bright silver skateboard struggled in Reed Richards' arms. Hulk roared and raised the skateboard and hit Ben on the side. The Ben who turned into stone shook. After 2 times, I sat on the ground and felt like my head was buzzing. Seeing that the stone head was no longer good, Hulk turned his attention to the red tank without giving the opponent a chance to refuse. He went up and hit it twice. The red tank, who was famous for his head, felt a little pain in his head. Gu Yi slowly walked out of the space door. His left hand threw out an orange rope to tie up the Silver Surfer, and his right hand pointed at the skateboard in Hulk's hand with an unquestionable look in his eyes. Roar! Hulk held the skateboard in his right hand and roared at Gu Yi, like a child protecting a toy. In the next moment, Gu Yi came to Hulk and knocked his soul out of the body with a palm. Banner looked at the green body in front of him in confusion. Understand why you are here. Ancient Yi held the skateboard in his right hand and the Silver Surfer in his left hand and disappeared from everyone's eyes. No one dared to stop him. After all, Banner's embarrassed soul was still sitting in the air in a breaststroke posture, trying hard to return to his body. No one wanted to be next Banner. Nick Fury stepped out of the bulletproof vehicle and prepared to say some encouraging words, but everyone formed small groups and began to discuss the next thing. It was so difficult to find a pathfinder. Everyone had a clear understanding of the strength of Galactus. Cognition. After returning to Comitage, Ancient Yi untied the Silver Surfer and restored the opponent's time flow to normal. Before Ancient Yi could ask a question, he heard the opponent's voice of praise. As expected of the Time Gem, Lord Galactus often praises several gems. If you can fully utilize the power of the gems, you may be able to withstand the clones sent by the Lord. Gumian expressionlessly poured 2 cups of tea and then made a gesture of invitation and said in a calm tone, "Why do you have to come to destroy the Earth?" Silver Surfer was slightly stunned and said subconsciously, "Because this planet meets Lord Galactus' requirements, the meaning of my existence is to find a planet for him. The meaning of existence is not given by others but determined by yourself." Ancient One's words were like a heavy hammer hitting Silver Surfer, and the sealed emotions seemed to be loosened. After a few seconds of silence, Silver Surfer said softly, "Maybe I can lure him away for you." Ancient One looked at the Silver Surfer up and down and nodded. At this point, she could only try the method the other party said. If it didn't work, she would forcefully activate the power of the Time Stone, and even if her body fell, she would stop Galactus from the Earth. Outside. "Don't worry, I won't betray your trust." Seeing Gu Yi return the skateboard to him without any hesitation, the Silver Surfer stared at Gu Yi with a solemn expression, then stepped on the skateboard and flew into the sky, preparing to lead Galactus to other places. Stark and Reed jointly created the energy detector sounded an alarm the moment he took off. Just when Stark was about to gather everyone to attack the opponent, the red dot on the instrument began to move into the air. The Silver Surfer, who flew out of the atmosphere, stopped in the universe and looked at the white vortex in the distant starry sky. His heart sank. The white vortex had spread outward at an extremely fast speed and soon enveloped the Earth. The people looked up at the suddenly darkened sky and secretly felt grateful that they could encounter such a spectacle. However, the bodies of those with strong strength were shaking, and their chests felt like it was a huge mountain that left them breathless. End of the chapter. Like and subscribe for more videos like this.